Gentlemen, if I can quietly quieten you down, please. Thank you. So, a very warm welcome this afternoon here to Auto World, to this event organized by Eurometaux, Raw Materials 2030, a rallying call for European resilience. A warm welcome to all of you here in the room, and a warm welcome also to our audience joining us virtually online. My name's David Rose, as some of you know, and I'll be guiding you through the program this afternoon, the different stages of our debate. But like any debate, it needs purpose. So what exactly is our purpose, or what are our aims this afternoon? Well, if you take a look at the screen, you can see we've got three clear, overarching aims for this afternoon's program and for this event. First, how can we turn the Critical Raw Materials Act, and thank you for the Critical Raw Materials Act, but how can we turn its political ambition into real European resilience by 2030 and after? I think the majority of us here in the room, if not all, and virtually know the challenge now is in implementation and delivering results. Second, what are the quantifiable barriers? And I repeat, quantifiable, evidence-based barriers to Europe competing more effectively in what we all know is a global race for raw materials supply and security. And third, and by no means least, how can both industry and the EU, and we choose the words carefully here, how can we, in effective partnership, because that's the only way we're going to deliver, industry, the EU, and wider civil society, achieve real and urgent change? So these are our three broad aims for today. And how are we going to deliver on that? Well, I think you know our program a little, but we're going to start off with resilience and the recipe for that. In a moment, I'll be interviewing Eurometaux President to get his optic to frame things today. And then two colleagues from Eurometaux will present the key points of their new manifesto, giving a, let's call it an actionable recipe for delivering on that resilience. Then we'll convene a debate with three members of the European Parliament representing three different political parties with their views on how we can get Europe back in the race. And then after a nice coffee break, which I promise I will protect for you, we will then have our second stakeholder panel with representatives of the Commission, industry, civil society and more, where we'll talk about advancing a real industrial deal for raw materials resilience. And then to bring it all together with a backward-looking and a forward-looking optic as well, I'll be joined by Guy Thiran, the General Secretary of Eurometaux, Director General, for his final reflections. Now, those of you that know me already know I don't do big introductions, so that's it for the introduction. Short and to the point, I hope. Let's get straight down to business today, because there's business to do. So can you give a massive round of applause for the Eurometaux President, please?
Thank you, David.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you.
Right.
Kalispera.
Kalispera indeed. That's the only thing I know in Greek, ladies and gentlemen, but I hope I say it well. Was my pronunciation good? Thank you. Okay. Kalispera. Okay. Noted. So let's get serious now then. Let's be frank. It's been quite an unprecedented period the last few years. We all know about COVID. We know about the war in Ukraine. We know about the energy crisis. We know about the cost of living crisis. And now as we speak, we have the risk of ongoing escalation in the Middle East. So the geopolitical picture is a challenging one and has been. So in this optic, let's take the pulse a little bit. Let's get a feeling from your view about Europe's non-ferrous metals industry. What are the priority concerns? What are the things that are really on the mind of CEOs like yourself in the sector, both for today and tomorrow?
Thank you. I'm glad to be here and talk to a very distinguished audience. I recall at the beginning of the year, in an interview, I was asked what worries me most as a CEO of a major industrial conglomerate. By then, the times were not so ominous. And I answered, the first thing I do in the morning when I wake up is to see what happened in the world at night. And the last thing I do before I go to bed is to read what happened in the world during the day. I didn't have in mind that I would be proven right so soon. So if you ask me what worries me most at the moment, it's geopolitics. We are extremely concerned, and if you look at it, it is going to affect Europe probably more than anybody else, Europe and European business. And that was worrying me most.
Okay, so clear, the geopolitical circumstances in evolution is a great concern. But then, in that optic, in that challenging context, let's take your company, Mytilineos. Now, I know that you have made significant investments in Europe, and you continue to do so. So, what's driven these investment decisions?
I am here, and people are interested to hear what we've got to say, because as a company, we put our money where our mouth is. We are not only blah, blah, or we are not only complaining to the European institutions or the Commission. We do invest, and we do invest mostly in Europe.
Yep.
We're a multinational company. We're active in 32 countries in the world, but most of our investments are in Europe. We are Europeans, and we want this European project to thrive. But as you know, there are problems. We are the ones that try to find solutions to the problems, and we do invest, and we do employ thousands of people in Europe, and we are here to do the job. But we need support, and that's not only a money thing. Money is important, like you mentioned CRM before. But you gave the answer yourself. It's a question and an answer together. CRM is a great thing, super thing. But it's empty. It's empty. What does it go with it? The Americans, before they decided the IRA, they thought about it very carefully. They saw how much money they had in place, and then they came out in public, and they said, we are starting the IRA, and the initial budget is going to be, I don't know, $350 billion, whatever. And they start to spend money on the projects. So CRM is great. And we ourselves, we have already applied to the Innovation Fund for a new project of 350 million euros for a project that involves 3 critical raw materials, which is bauxite, alumina, and gallium. And we are ready to go ahead. Technically, we can do it. Financially, we can support it. But we need the EU on our side.
Okay. So you see the CRM as a good tool, but it needs that support for you to be able to deliver on it and make it work. I note recently, I read the financial papers occasionally, and I noticed that your company's also made the decision to acquire the remaining bauxite mine in Greece. And in parallel, you've also invested in bauxite mines in Ghana. So again, on the one side, you're saying, okay, you see the CRM as needing further support, but you continue to make these investment decisions in the direction that it wants to go. So what drove that?
Thank you. It's a great question, and I want to be very specific on this one. We have come to understand that the globalization, the way we knew it, is changing, and it's changing fast. We see, for example, the Chinese making it almost impossible for other people in the world to buy some of the rare earths, including the gallium that I mentioned. we see proposals in the US to increase tariffs of Chinese products. What does that all mean? It's a new globalization era. You cannot stop globalization by decree. No, that's not possible. But it's going to be with new rules, and it's going to be much more difficult. So, if we want to keep our business alive, we have to make sure we have the raw materials. So what do? We buy whatever bauxite mines are available in Europe, which are mostly in Greece. We are the biggest bauxite producer in Greece. But that's not enough. So we go to Ghana. Ghana has a lot of bauxite. Look at this, David, look at this difficulty. China, at the beginning of this century, they produced 6% of the global aluminum. They now produce 65%. But these guys, they have little bauxite. So they've been importing all the bauxite from all over the world. Now they have come to buy 70% of the bauxite from a little West African country called Guinea. 70%. We're talking about dozens of millions of bauxite. So tell me, what's going to happen to the global aluminum industry if anything happens to Ghana? For me, this is one of the main issues of the CRM. We have to try to be in Europe as autonomous as possible in the critical raw materials. And that is not only a business issue, it's a political issue.
Okay, so it's a business and political issue, and it's about making sure we maximize what we're doing here, but we also make sure we have the partnerships we need outside of Europe to also source our raw materials.
Absolutely.
So it's always the domestic versus import question again. Now, let's scale up a little bit here in two ways. So moving on from your role as CEO of Mytilineos, and let's look at your role also and your perspective as Eurometaux president. You've talked about what your company's doing there, putting its money where its mouth is, as you said. You've also mentioned a few of the challenges that are there. But how scalable is this type of investment ambition to the sector as a whole?
Europe has been always, for centuries, at the forefront of the industrial revolution, the industrial development, technology development, and everything. And there's no doubt that the scale is there, because let's not forget that the European market is the biggest market in the world in terms of population, in terms of gross domestic product, and so on. We should not wonder about the scale. The problem is, again, I'm sorry to come back to this one, because it's a business discussion, but it's unfortunately, it is becoming more and more political. Mm-hmm. So the scale can be easily found if the incentives are there. Okay. Are the incentives there? What kind of incentives you need? We make proposals all the time in Eurometaux. That's what we do. And I tell you, we are doing a good job. I'm only president for 2 years. Eurometaux has been around for decades. But the guys that work there, they do a good job, and they always come up with solutions. We don't just complain. We're finding out there are problems, and we're putting together solutions. That's what we do all the time. No matter the scale. Don't worry about the scale.
Well, so we can scale up, and we'll hear a bit more about those solutions with the presentation in a moment. But let's wrap things up a little bit then and bring it to a conclusion. So we've talked about a number of different areas, about priorities, about concerns, about a few areas of barriers, about scalability. And it's clear from what you've said that there's hope. You're confident that with the right conditions, we can deliver. So what are your final thoughts for the audience as we move on in our program today?
Which one? Sorry?
What are your final thoughts for our audience, just to conclude our interview?
To do the scale, to do the investments, to go ahead with the Europe that we all dream of, we have to have a level playing field. And I think everybody in this room knows that at the moment, European companies do not exercise their business on a global level playing field. That does not exist. There are tectonical, geological shifts going on at the moment which affect trade policies, affect domestic financial policies, especially in China, but also in the United States. Europe is a very big power. It now wants to become a big military power as well, which is a different conversation, but it's going to drain a lot of resources from Europe and adds to the problems. And we all need to do something about all these things. We have to have political solutions. There are times, you know, David, when business is more important to the people and the public opinion because of the jobs, because of the general climate of the society and the economy. And there are other times, like now, that politics is the case. And for that matter, geopolitics.
Okay, so if you had one final message to our policymakers and politicians in the room, what would it be?
I've written it down. So, I told you my worries. That's number one.
Yeah.
In the metal business especially, the worries are extreme because Europe, unfortunately, as you all know, has probably the highest cost of energy in the world. And when we're talking about metals, we're talking about energy.
Yeah.
That's why our company is called Mytilineos Energy and Metals. Okay. Because if we divide the two, metals does not live anymore. The reason we are alive is because we saw on time that we have to combine the two. I hope, that's number two, I have to hope. Because if we lose hope, what do? Of course we hope. Because we have the people, we have the markets, we have the history, we have the tradition, we have the ambition to do things. Of course I hope. And last but not least, we have to be bolder. And we have to have a sense of energy, all of us, and especially Europe as a whole and the European institutions in particular.
Okay, so you want more boldness and a scaled-up ambition as we move into the next cycle after the European elections.
We have to have a new general scheme of a grand alliance between politics and business. Politics cannot live without the business, and definitely business cannot live without the politics. We must not fight with each other. We must not always go to the Commission and the Parliament and asking for favors, do this, do that. No. This all must be one thing, because the interest is mutual.
Okay, clear. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So as I mentioned before then, now we've set a little bit of a frame with that interview, and we've talked about solutions. We've heard a lot about not just posing problems, but giving solutions. I'm going to hand over now to some colleagues from Eurometaux to present their recipe for resilience with a focus on solutions. So could we welcome to the stage with a round of applause Chris Heron and Adina Georgescu, please.
Thank you, David. I'm Chris Heron. I lead Eurometaux's raw materials activities.
And I'm Adina Georgescu. I'm leading on energy and climate change.
Together with Adina, we're going to talk you through Eurometaux's new rallying call for European resilience, our lasting recipe for Critical Raw Materials Act success over the next 6 years. The document you all handed as you entered the room today. So, what is our rallying call? is that Europe must act urgently for its 2030 resilience. 2030 is only 2,000 days from now and counting. The challenges ahead are clear and the concerns of our business leaders are real. It really is now or never. The next 5 years will define our continent's industrial future. As an industry, we want to look forwards, and as you heard, we can deliver. But we need Europe to unlock our potential. We have the lasting recipe for Europe's resilience if we can compete. Let's not forget it's still over 2 times more expensive to build a plant here in Europe than our rivals. So we need a Europe of bold action, an industrial deal led by an executive vice president, delivered with urgency, as our other industrial partners are calling for. If we can deliver that industrial deal in those framework conditions, then we can deliver our lasting recipe. Because as an industry, we have the willing cooks, and they have the ambition to create the conditions here for Europe's resilience themselves. But they need the competitive European kitchen to compete. Our lasting recipe has 6 key ingredients. Number 1, opening new capacity. Number 2, reviving production. Number 3, maximizing recycling. Number 4, securing global supply. Number 5, decarbonizing our electricity. And number 6, increasing our skills. Myself and Adina will now take you through those ingredients one by one. The first step of our recipe is opening new capacity. Here in Europe, we need to take a real quantum leap forward. We haven't opened the metals mine successfully in the last 10 years, only a handful of recycling and processing plants. But the Critical Raw Materials Act sets bold and welcome goals to change this picture. Our forecasts are that Europe, to meet these goals, will need to open at least 10 new mines in the next 6 years, 15 new processing plants, and 15 new recycling facilities for our strategic raw materials. As an industry, we know our responsibility is to do this with sustainability at the center. And the good news is that we do have a project pipeline in Europe of over 70 projects, which can come online by 2030 if we have those framework conditions. So this goal is feasible. And of course, we need to control better our domestic supply. Of course, we need to combine that with diversified global supply, because the alternative is not one that any of us can accept.
Step 2 of our recipe, reviving production, restoring our strong industrial base. The picture on the screen is from Germany. It is a state-of-the-art aluminum facility. This is the future we want in Europe for raw materials. Sadly, this plant is not just curtailed, it has permanently closed due to the high energy prices, which are still over 2 times higher over here in Europe compared to elsewhere in the world. And this is the general picture of our industry in Europe. We have 50% of our capacity in aluminium, zinc, and silicon that is closed. It's closed right now. This contrasts so strongly with what we need over here in Europe. What we need is for Europe to bring back online 20 plants, all 20 plants that have been curtailed in order to reach the Europe raw materials goals. And we need to do that fast. 2030 is just around the corner.
The third step of our recipe is maximizing recycling. We need to do better at managing our waste locally and well as part of the longer, bigger efforts towards a deeper circular economy. Our forecasts are that Europe should be aiming to ensure at least a 10% increase in recycling supply contribution across our strategic raw materials where that's feasible, through improving our collection, our sorting, and our shipments. The glasses on the screen show the state of the art today for 3 critical materials: copper, needed in electrification, lithium for our batteries, and neodymium for our rare earth magnets. For copper, recycling is already supplying half of our needs today. Adding 10% onto that will be a hard-fought but important further step forwards. For lithium, for neodymium, we're just putting those metals into the market for the first time. So this decade, it's crucial that we start filling the grass, putting that 10% on to be in track for our longer-term circular economy trajectory. And the fourth part of our recipe is securing the global supply, providing the funding for the partnerships and projects that we need. As many in the room will know, China leads the world's global mining investment. The slides on the screen, the charts on the screen speak for themselves. We need to rebalance this picture if we're serious about securing our global supply to combine with our domestic production. The European Commission has delivered great tools here. Now it's time to turn plans into action. We'd like to commit to that Europe commits to funding at least 15 third country raw materials projects through its global gateway or other tools.
And now step 5. Who in this audience recognizes the country on screen? I see. It's the Netherlands. The Netherlands has the Netherlands' annual consumption of electricity is 110 terawatt hour. And this is about the same amount of electricity that our sector needs in Europe to produce the metals. So, and this is, if we want to reach the 2030 raw materials goals, we need affordable, we need available, we need low carbon, and we need globally competitive electricity. And the whole Netherlands of it, all 110 terawatt hour of electricity. And now, step 6, and the final step, increasing skills. We need, in order to reach the raw materials goals, we need 10,000 more skilled workers in Europe. However, from geologists to miners to engineers and more. But where are we today? Well, today, due to curtailments and closures, we are not where we should be, and we are losing our rich skills, our rich industrial skills base. So what we need is to bring back the production that has been curtailed in order to keep the rich skills that we have in Europe, and we need to build on that. Ladies and gentlemen, as you have heard from Chris earlier, we have a rallying call. Europe must act urgently for its 2030 resilience. We need to act now or never. 2030 is just around the corner. It's less than 2,000 days from now. We need to unlock our potential. We have the lasting recipe for Europe's resilience, but we need to be able to compete globally. That is why we need a Europe of bold action. We need an industrial deal led by an executive vice president delivered within the first 100 days of the next Commission's mandate. We have the recipe. We have the willing cooks. We only need to build the right kitchen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As I speak, ladies and gentlemen, they will be revealing names behind me. This is part of the plan. So we've heard then a clear recipe of 6 steps, if you like. A recipe that there's a strong faith that we can deliver. Thank you. That we can deliver on. 2,000 days. I did the maths myself. I think it's 2,079 today. I forget. Because I've spent years, like many of you have, talking about 2030. But let's actually get a bit pragmatic. It's 2,000 and a little bit days. Now, I would like to add a disclaimer here, and excuse me for doing so. I haven't counted European Commission or Parliament holidays here. Okay? So if we talk about, and we take away weekends, and we talk about actionable working days for everybody in this room, the number becomes quite small. So the urgency does become large. But I think we're all aware of that. I think we're clearly aware of that. So what are we going to do now? Well, before we transition into our debate with our members of the European Parliament, I'd just like to reach out to you, our audience. I think it's great to receive good information, but it's great to give yours too. So I'd like to ask you all a question, hands up here in the room to answer it. If you're at home or in your office virtually, you can raise your hand. I can't see you, but you can raise your hand. Question: how confident are you that by 2030, Europe has actually achieved, it's caught up, it's done what it wants to do, and we've delivered on the Critical Raw Materials Act? Let's be ambitious, let's be hopeful, right? Number 1, very confident. We've got the Critical Raw Materials Act and wider policy framework, and now it's about delivery. So we're very confident we can do it. Raise a hand if that's you. Okay. Right. So rather than counting the numbers, ladies and gentlemen, I would say European Commission and European Parliament partially. Right. Now, But we always like to give a nuanced view. The world's not black and white, is it? It's a million shades of grey. So in the middle, with some adjustments, necessary adjustments, the framework can deliver for us. Raise a hand if you believe that's the case. I'm getting about 15 people in the room here. Probably about 7 to 9% of our participants. Okay, so now we come to hopeful. We still have hope. The next policy cycle, the next European institutions, if they're bolder, we can do it. Raise a hand if you think that's the case. Straw poll, that's about 2/3 to oh, sorry, I'm not raising my hand. 2/3 to 3/4. I'm the moderator, I'm impartial, ladies and gentlemen. That's about 2/3 to more like 3/4 of our room. And then last but not least, we have also, I'm not confident at all, where hope is low. Unfortunate if it's the case, but it's got to be there. Our ambition, or ambition as we call it, is significantly larger than our current toolkit. Raise a hand if that's you. And I'm seeing here, again, about 7 or 8% of our room. So our starting point, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sharing. Give yourself a round of applause. Come on, please. So now, I challenge here our members of the European Parliament as you join me in a moment on stage. That's the views of the raw materials community and wider community here in the room. Let's start our debate from there, please. So can we give them a very warm round of applause to come up to the stage, please, ladies and gentlemen? Our 3 members of the European Parliament. Come on, let's give them a welcome. So joining me, as you can see, we have Hildegard Bentele from the EPP, Jan-Christoph Oetjen from Renew, and Sara Matthieu representing the Greens. I give an apology to you all from the colleague from the Social Democrat, S&D, who due to a constituency issue was not able to join us at short notice. So what we're going to do with a rotating speaking order is work our way through a series of key questions around the topics that we're covering today. So let me bring up on the screen for you our first question. Our first question. There we are. As you can see on the screen, building new raw materials and clean tech production in Europe. What are your priorities to help Europe catch up with the US and China, securing final investments into new local raw materials capacity and other energy transition industries? We're going to start here in order. Hildegard, and then Jan, and then Sara, and we'll rotate the order democratically as we move on. So Hildegard, straight on to you, please.
Yes, I think the first thing is that we keep the industrial policy on the agenda and make it a priority. We pushed it back, and it was mainly an EPP initiative, as you know, the Critical Raw Materials Act, the Net Zero Industry Act, and we want to make it a priority. That means we want to check everything against competitiveness, and I think we have set a good framework which also allows us to modernize, to transform, and to keep technological leadership. We have an internal market, which is we have to exploit even more. We have well-off consumers, so we have huge advantages, but we have to exploit it more, and this will be in the focus regarding our solutions. But we also need more private capital, I think. It cannot only be run by public money, and this is why we also advocate that we finalize the capital market union, because we need more capital to go into these sectors, in these relevant sectors. But if you combine this and focus and prioritize, I think we can make it.
Okay, thank you. Jan?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I would like to say that I agree that we need to put competitiveness back on the top of the agenda. It has not been on the top of the agenda the last 5 years, to be very honest, in the von der Leyen Commission. So for me, this is really key that we think of, okay, how do we get this competitiveness back on track? On critical raw materials, I really want to say that we have this good framework with the Critical Raw Materials Act, and I think that we need to do the next step. That means that Commission needs to start designating the strategic projects. We've heard there are 70 projects in the pipeline, so we need to decide where to go and bring this on track. And we heard from your president that it's not only a question of money. it's not only a question of money. I think we need to talk about de-risking investments as well, because this is the big topic from my point of view. So we need to see how we can do this. For me, a good idea would be to have European Union and member states funds for critical raw materials, and that they act together. So that they can bring up a fund with a revolving system that investments can be done and can be de-risked. I think this is important in order to get those things done that need to be done, because I see that the companies, they are willing to invest, but they're shying away from some of those investments.
Okay, thanks. Sara?
All right, maybe first off, to tell you that we as Greens really believe that our European industry has an essential role to play in a climate neutral and in a prosperous economy. I would say that we are not pessimistic. In fact, we really see a unique opportunity, an opportunity for the return of well-paid quality jobs for the working class, to accelerate the climate action, and of course to protect our competitiveness. I think that I would go as far as to say that, well, the actions of the US and China that have really given us a major wake-up call and that can actually turbocharge our Green Deal. I think that the problem is that both the US and China actually right now, they are acting as continental-sized economies, while we, our industrial policy, to the extent that it really exists, it's still mostly national. So that means that it's quite fragmented, that means that it's quite incoherent, and that is of course harming the speed, the efficiency that we need, the investments, and of course the transition. So I think that we need more European coordination, and indeed we need to put in place a high-level team led by a vice president in the Commission with the right competences to align all of those member states to avoid this race to the bottom in Europe. And secondly, I really think we need to step up both the public and the private investments in a very coordinated way. We need to close that investment gap. That means, for instance, creating a joint borrowing scheme. This is something that was promised at a certain point by von der Leyen with the Sovereignty Fund, but that was not delivered. I think that that is absolutely crucial if we want to ensure a level playing field amongst the member states, but of course also the access to the necessary funds to make sure that the transition works.
Okay, so clear points from each of you. Any reflections from you about what you've heard from your parliamentary colleagues here? We've heard about financing. We've heard from Jan about de-risking, about coordination between member states and the Commission. Sara, you've mentioned this idea for that fragmentation risk and how we need to address that. Is that something that you have a consensus of collectively, or are there differing views on that?
Do you come in?
Well, I think we're going in the right way. I mean, still we have national industrial policies, we have still national energy mixes and so on, but I think with the two acts I just mentioned, with the energy market design, I mean, we have a lot of, we put ahead a lot of initiatives on the European level, and I agree with my colleague Oetjen that we have to implement now. It's about projects, it's about financing, we have to get things done. And I would go even farther. It's not only the competence of a vice president, it's the competence of the president of the Commission to make it, and it has become a priority very clearly. You heard it in the last State of the Union speech, and we are following up on that, and we don't need somebody like Timmermans who's putting emphasis on the Green Deal. We need an industrial deal. And this is where we should stick on, we should implement and have first results, and then we will see if we have to revise or adjust the framework. But I think we should work what we have, and we should check for incoherences, but we have to now to deliver. That's, for me, that's the period to deliver, because we have done a lot of legislation. Now we have to implement, see the projects, see the results, and get to the targets, fulfill the targets. I think that's the main task.
Okay, clear from you, but Sara, so you want to come in on that?
Yeah, because I mean, I think there are a lot of areas where we can agree. But of course, if Hildegard says now it's just a time for implementation and not so much for Green Deal, then of course I'm going to go against it, and you won't be surprised. because I think we need a green industrial deal. I think it would be very unwise of us to now say, let's hit the pause button on innovation, let's hit the pause button on the green transition and just go forward with what we have. I think then you are really harming our competitiveness towards, for instance, China and the US that are really in an acceleration. So for me, both need to go hand in hand. Yes, we need an industrial deal, but it needs to be a green industrial deal.
Okay, clear. But Jan, you want to come in on that?
Well, I think that you're right that we need this a green industrial deal. But if you look back, what happened in this mandate is that very often the proposals from the Commission, and honestly, I don't care if it's Timmermans or if it's von der Leyen, they sit in the same college, right? And they decide together. And Timmermans was the first vice president of Ursula von der Leyen. So my impression was that it was very often a very high target without so much knowing on how to get there. But the problem is that what we are going through at the moment is a loss of competitiveness of European countries and of European industry, thus European countries, is a loss of jobs in industry. And this is really worrying for me. And this is because we have not put competitiveness on the top of the agenda, because sometimes we have put high targets and accepting that this would have consequences on the industry. And so I think that a lot of those policies have not been developed together with the industry, and I think there we need really a change in how we approach those policy areas. And I agree with Hilde that it's up to implementing now. I think we have enough rules, right? We should now work on delivering.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a minute here. We've talked about finance. We've touched upon, Sara, you did, about learning from our rivals. We've heard previous comments about the US IRA, China, etc. We've touched upon global competition, but we say we don't need any more rules. But I think many industry players will say, where are my lead markets? Public procurement. Where are the rules that say, buy green, high SG European, not cheap imported carbon footprint? We've got Indonesian nickel dumping on the market now. What are we doing about that? So on the one hand, I take your point, Jan, that it's about delivery. It's not about more regulation. What's the old saying? China subsidizes, the US incentivizes, and Europe... Thank you. Could we try that again, ladies and gentlemen? It's like panto. Let's do that again. China subsidizes, the US incentivizes, and Europe... Okay. Yeah. I know it's an old, worn-out joke, ladies and gentlemen, but it's there. So let's just touch upon that ESG thing. I'd like the views from all three of you on this. What do we do about creating real lead markets here for made in Europe and made to good, high ESG standards? That's our winning formula, surely. Hildegard, I'll bring you in, and Jan, and then Sara, please.
Yeah, of course we have to look at the global level playing field, and I think that's what you talk about. I mean, I don't know if it's so smart to subsidize industries which might not live, themselves. So, I mean, we should be smart. But we thought about a level playing field. I mean, next week we'll vote on the eco-design. So this is a very important thing, to give a label what is a sustainable product. And this is what we asked for from the steel industry, because they want to say this is green steel made in Europe, and they can then distinguish themselves from green steel made in China or somewhere else. So this we're going to do. And what we are pushing very much for, to give a price to CO2. I mean, it's an EPP initiative to extend the emission trading system, and I want to have this a global system. And I'm talking on a permanent basis with Wopke Hoekstra that we make this an issue at climate conferences, that we have an alliance, that we increase this idea of giving a price to CO2, because then we have a level playing field.
Right, so it helps us level the playing field. So I've taken clearly from you that yes, we absolutely need to action this, and we need to make sure that we're creating that viable business case for people to make those investments and make that made in Europe. Yeah?
I mean, I'm a liberal, so I'm not in favor of doing a competition on who gives the most subsidies, right? This is not the right solution if we want to have a sustainable industry. But the point is right. If you don't make money, you don't survive. So you need a business case for companies in Europe. And Hildegard is right that with the ETS discussion, we have set a market-driven framework in order to price CO2 emissions. And this is the right way to do it because we decarbonize this way. This way we use the most effective tools in order to decarbonize our industry. And I think on the trajectory of decarbonizing the industry, we all agree, because this is what we discussed during this whole Green Deal debate. The question is how we do it. And there sometimes you have differences if you want to use all the tools, all the energies that are available, if you want to use more regulatory approach, or if you want more a market-driven approach. And so I very much agree with Hildegard that the framework is the most important part. And we need to put in place as well, and we discussed this in the Green Deal, how do we do, or how do we, realize that this carbon border adjustment mechanism that has been proposed, but how does it work then in practice, and will it really deliver on what it aims to deliver, so that we have carbon intensive products from outside not coming to the European Union?
Okay, clear. Sara?
Well, I think that there have been some very important legislations that were decided upon recently to protect our internal markets. And in that sense, you know, you can say you don't like regulation, but I think it's very necessary to have that regulation. For instance, indeed, CBAM, for instance, against forced labor, for instance, against the deforestation. I mean, this is regulation that is put there to protect our businesses against unfair competition. So, I mean, you have to take that into account, that sometimes I think it's really necessary, and we've been lacking behind in doing that. So we need more legislation on certain cases. And indeed, you said public procurement, I completely agree. I think we need to modernize our public procurement rules to make sure that indeed our companies that are the best ones in environmental standards, that are the best ones in social standards, etc., actually come up first in these standards. This is a huge market that can be used as a kickstart for all of our innovative companies. We need things like green content targets, for instance, and indeed, of course, eco-design, I worked on it myself, is a way of actually achieving that. I think, well, in the next term, there are still things we can change and that we need to change. I mean, we've been talking, for instance, of course, today about critical raw materials, and we'll dive into it deeper. But for me, for instance, what is lacking in that legislation is a real target when it comes to demand reduction. That's not really in there. So, I mean, okay, I can understand that for some of you it has been a lot. It has been a lot of legislation with the Green Deal, but I think it's too simple now to say, now we're just going to go to implementation. I think that would be a mistake.
So you're talking then about what could be termed in a way an intelligent implementation with adjustments to the legislation where it helps deliver. Yeah?
It depends. I mean, it might be that there's a need for new legislation. I just wouldn't want to, to rule that out.
Okay. Right. Thanks. So bearing in mind we've got 5 questions to get through, I'm going to move on to the second one now. Right. I think we could spend a bit longer on the first one, but we're going to move on. So, right. It's not elephant in the room, overused phrase, but we've seen numbers here about levels of curtailment, and the idea that deindustrialization is not happening, I won't accept. The numbers are there, the data is there, the amount of jobs being lost, the skills being lost, the know-how being lost, and the amount in the metals sector of production which is offline or permanently closed. We saw the example in the presentation before about a leading plant in Germany that's not just curtailed, but permanently gone. So we have deindustrialization with all of the economic and social fabric effects of that. That's where we are. That's the reality. So what are your priorities to reverse this deindustrialization? Not just slow it down, but stop it and bring it back to revive industry and address the curtailments, that are not just affecting metals but other sectors. So here I'll go, Jan, with you first, then Sara, then Hildegard. So what are your key things that we can do there in actioning this, and actioning it with some urgency as well?
Yeah, thank you, David. And I think the example that you've put, Chris, is it Neuss, right? The aluminium facility in Neuss? Yes, I guess so. Yeah, sorry, that's my German accent. Neuss, right?
Okay, good.
Yeah, and this shows the reality of this, or this shows the reality of the situation, right? And I mean, this has been shut down in 2023, I think in spring, due to high energy prices. And I mean, let's be frank. High energy prices is the killer of industry jobs at the moment. So we see in Germany now that the energy prices are going down again, luckily, and this is so the right trajectory. We are concerning Germany. Energy prices for industry are at the 2019 level, still too high, but at the 2019 level. So before pandemic, before war. But I think the real issue is this question of energy prices. So what we need to do is to have a good supply of cheap green energy. So
right, clear. But the key question here is, how are we going to deliver on that? So how do you suggest we do?
If you let me elaborate, I will do so. And I know that the first answer shall be short, but the key for me is to first use all technologies that are available. So talking about nuclear as well, and I know that you will not agree, but or probably
Belgium
not agree. So I'm talking about nuclear. I'm talking about imports as well of green energy. There are some people in the European Parliament, and I don't know for European Commission, but for European Parliament, I know for sure that think that we can have all production of energy for the European Union in the European Union, and I think this is I don't know in which world they are living, but I don't think this will become reality. So we need a diverse partners, and as German, I say as well, diverse partners. Yeah, we had one important partner in Germany, which was Russia, and we saw the results of being dependent on one partner. So I think that we have to pay attention to not to be dependent on other partners, on one partner, but to have a variety of partners, and then importing a good clean energy as well. And there are countries which are producing this, and where we start to have those cooperation. Think of Chile, Australia, but there will be countries on the African continent as well that could be good partners.
So clear from your side that for you then, this goal, particularly in the short to medium term of achieving that level of energy independence, is not going to happen. So we've got to be honest about that, and we've got to be bold about diversifying our sources of energy as well. Okay, that's great. So moving on then, Sara?
Well, I would say that my first big priority is linked to the previous question. Really, we need more coordinated European action. Well, for instance, a recent example of this sort of regulatory race to the bottom here in Europe. Earlier this year, we all know Nyrstar, they shut down their zinc production in the Netherlands. Why? Because some governments in other EU countries continued to hand out subsidies, and the Dutch government decided not to do so. So I think that that's quite ridiculous. I mean, if you look at the way things are right now, without strategically design and coordinated policy at a European level, I think it's clear we are not fit for the Chinese nor the US, and then they will indeed wipe out our European industry. So that's of course not what we want. I think it's clear when it comes to one of the big questions, it's indeed on energy and the electrification. I think that we need to be very honest that we will never be able to, for instance, match the low gas prices in the US. So that's really why, one of the reasons why we really need to electrify as fast as possible our industry and make sure that we provide that strategic financial support for it really in the short term. I'm thinking about, for instance, contracts for difference, PPAs that can really ensure that secure competitiveness and fair prices for our industry that are really needed if you're asking them to invest in this reconversion. I think on the longer term, we really need to provide certainty, stability, predictability for our European industry, for them to stay and not to relocate. And that, of course, again, demands a lot of European decisions, I would say, in planning, in financing, in procurement, in materials. I mean, if we want to provide a real convincing picture of sufficient production capacity, of energy grids, of, you know, particularly interconnections that we need to drive down the costs, well, I think it's a very clear example why we really need to have this kind of joint borrowing scheme for public investments. I think it's the only way to make sure that that security and that right pricing is there for industry to stay in Europe.
Okay, Hildegard?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, energy costs are key. And so this is why I would, you know, extend as much as possible our resources, not phase out anything before we have not phased out a replacement. Also to have transition periods, to have low carbon options too. And what is very clear, we have to invest in our infrastructure, in our grids, because if we have a unified energy market in the EU, we are much better off. I agree with my colleague from the Liberals that we will always import energy, and we should work on, you know, getting down the transport costs for hydrogen and so on. We should work on that. But I think we should keep open as much as possible options to have a diversified energy landscape, and this I think can help, but also on a national level. I mean, you can lower taxes, you can lower utility fees, which are pretty high. So I'm looking to somebody who sits in the German government, so you can also act on a short notice. But on the aluminium case,
that's why we did, by the way, during the pandemic, right? So,
yeah, we should keep it and continue. So, but on the aluminium case, I think we are at a decisive moment. I mean, it's really a question if you can keep everything we have. Because every industry has to change. And I mean, I can just saw the example of the steel industry where they go for hydrogen, you know, replace gas by hydrogen. And they also get support and contracts of difference and so on. But can we do this with every plant? I mean, that's a big question. So I think we need innovation. We need more energy efficiency. I would be reluctant to promise to every plant that it can survive. I mean, all sectors will have to change. All sectors will have to be innovative. And I'm saying this as a German looking at our car industry who has missed a chance to modernize, who are taken over by now the e-vehicles from China because they have not come up at the right moment with these new solutions, sticking to old business models. So my call would be, even if we are aware we want to have an industry which is not only climate technologies but also heavy industry, because we need the whole range, we need the whole value chain. I'm pretty much aware, but I would be reluctant not to call also an appeal on everybody to look for modernization, innovation, to catch up with the others.
Okay. One of the things we haven't touched upon yet when we're talking about not just trying to mitigate, but reverse this deindustrialization. So we've got the raw materials we need to deliver on the Green Deal, because they're an enabler. Without them, it's not going to happen. We haven't talked yet about coherence. We've talked about whether we want more legislation or not, and which instruments we can use. But let's just touch very briefly upon this, about regulatory coherence. I think I saw in the Antwerp Declaration a very clear call. I also saw over 1,000 signatures to it, so it's a loud and clear call from my perspective, I hope from yours too, about trying to eliminate the existing legacy regulatory coherence and conflicting issues. Now, many in the room are familiar about some of the challenges between, for example, chemicals policy and raw materials, between the Wastewater Directive and mining, and there's lots of examples. I don't want to list them all, and I don't think we want to either. But let's turn it around. How should we, in your opinion, address these existing legacy incoherences which threaten our ability, genuinely, to actually deliver this Green Deal and deliver on the Critical Raw Materials Act. So I'll go here in the order we are. So Hildegard, Jan, and Sara, just briefly, please.
Yeah, talk to us. I mean, I consider myself as a watchdog over the CRMA, and I was pushing very much for policy coherence because I see the incoherence, and we have a current example on the soil, on the soil regulation, and I was putting forward an amendment to make it very clear that mineral deposits are exempt. It didn't get a majority until now. So I'm fighting for this on a constant basis.
Clear, and I think that fighting is welcomed by so many in the room, but allow me to, again, to be devil's advocate just a little bit here. I remember having this conversation 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago. I do like to moderate regularly. And in all honesty, it's the same discussion. I'm going to go on to circularity in a minute, but I'm doing it already because it's a bit of a circular discussion from my perspective. We keep coming back to this, where every individual player in the cycle of creating the legislation, dealing with the implementation, all the partners involved, civil society, industry, policymakers at national and European level, we seem to be having a little bit of a perfect circular economy here in terms of discussion, that everybody says, yes, this is important, yes, we need this. But my question is, where is it?
I mean, first of all, it's the task of the Commission to come up with coherent proposals. Okay. And I insist less is more. The more we have, the more the risk of incoherence, comes up. So because some DGs do not talk to each other, if the Environment Commissioner is not talking to Breton, and so on and so on.
So
another trade commissioner.
Actionability then. What would be your proposal to allow us to rapidly, I use the sense of urgency here, I know it's an overused term, but still, with some urgency, how can we eliminate or mitigate these incoherences which threaten our ability to deliver in 2,000 days and counting? What's your proposal? How do we do it? Anyone?
Well, to be honest, the only way to do it is what has already been mentioned at the beginning by Eurometaux President, that we need a commissioner, vice president, however, who has the power to propose regulatory changes that then go through the college by the Commission. The problem is, I was member of Parliament in Germany before. I would have written the proposal myself, but I'm not allowed to do so here in the European Parliament. So we need the proposals from the Commission. They have to take care of the coherence. And I think what we did with the Green Deal, or what von der Leyen and Timmermans did with the Green Deal, because I did not support all of the proposals. But what they did, that was to designate one person, this was Franz Timmermans, and they say, you deliver on the Green Deal. And he was charged by Ursula von der Leyen to deliver on the Green Deal and to deliver on the Paris Agreement targets. And that's what he did. That was his mission. And we need someone now to take care of this mission, to do better industrial policies than what we have done in the last years.
Okay, so that approach then of that, not only the signal of ambition of having that person in place, but also then their ability top-down to make that happen more rapidly, you would support. And I believe, Hildegard, is that the same for you?
Absolutely. I mean, if it's a question of hierarchy, it's a question of hierarchy. But I think we can see already with Vice President Šefčovič, who has a completely different approach, who sees the broader picture. And this is what we need. It's not a miracle, But if you have one-sided politics, ideological politics, then you get what you get. Now we have a much better situation, I would say.
Okay, and Sara?
Well, I mean, I of course agree with the fact that a lot of our legislation ends up in silos, and I think that that's not the best way of doing politics. I'm in 3 committees in the European Parliament, and often I see that indeed the DGs are not talking to each other, that, well, sometimes it's not very coherent what they are proposing. And of course, for us, it's different in that sense. I mean, I'm in the environmental, in the social, in the trade committee. I do have more of this helicopter view. I think that indeed needs to change. And I mean, if you look at industry, for instance, to me, it's quite peculiar that then you would have a completely different department, for instance, on energy, while both are so interlinked and dependent on each other. So of course that is not going to work. So yeah, I mean, for me there needs to be more coherence. I agree with that. I also hear and understand that sometimes in legislation for you as companies it becomes very difficult, because with every sort of with every sort of new piece of legislation and new ways of going about it, you have different definitions, they don't really match each other, and sometimes that's a political compromise, sometimes that's really due to a certain lobby that really wants to have an exemption for their specific case. I think there, we as a parliament also need to be more vigilant and coherent in what we put forward.
Okay, clear. I'm going to transition on now, as I linked before then, to our third question around circularity. You touched upon this earlier, Sara, yourself, a little bit around the idea of reducing demand. And clearly we know if we're going to deliver, it's not just obviously about repowering European raw materials industry, reversing the deindustrialization, dealing with energy prices. We've also got to deal with the circular economy aspect of this too. And that's clear in the CRMA with the target we have for that. So the question is, what are your priorities to maximize circular economy in Europe for our clean tech and digital supply chains to help reduce pressure on primary raw materials supply? So this time, averting our order again, Sara, you'll go first, then Jan, then Hildegard, please. If I could ask you this time to keep your answers even that little bit shorter as we move forward, so we can keep that pace going into the break. Thank you.
That will be difficult because for me the circular economy is really my passion, but I will do my very best. Of course, on CRM I also work together with Hildegard, but one of the big things that I did in this mandate is the reform of the waste shipment regulation, and I think that I can say that we really made progress there, for instance, when it comes to scrap exports. I mean, thanks to the reform, it will be easier to trade scrap for recycling in the EU. And, well, equally important, of course, we were able to introduce mandatory audits in the third countries to make sure that that scrap is not improperly recycled. So there we have this important benchmark that they need to meet the equivalent health and environmental requirements, and I think that that is really a great win. It will mean more volumes of scrap available here in the EU. But of course, we also need to use our resources better, smarter, more efficiently if we indeed want to avoid certain resource choke points. I think for me the priorities are a better collection system, for instance, deposit refund systems, etc., for electronics, but also, of course, eco-design. I think we all know that materials, metals are becoming more and more complex. Sometimes that's really necessary to make them lighter, to make them more performant, but that can really be a problem for recycling and reuse. So we really need those common standards for recycling and reuse along indeed with public procurement to start the demand for those circular products. And well, I think that we will soon see that when the delegated acts come in for the eco-design regulation, but we of course also have the batteries regulation there, we have the end of life of vehicles, and well, just to finish, I really think the demand of the demand mitigation is really something that we are still lacking. I mean, if you are having a risk in your supply chain, either you find new supply or you try and reduce the demand, of course, through substitution is a possibility, but I really think we also need to look at the redesign of our products, the change of our business models, for instance. I mean, lightweight vehicles instead of huge cars. I think that's really also the strategy of the Chinese. We still design very big vehicles. They design very small and affordable models that now really flood the EU market. So for me, we really need to promote that a lot more, and that's something that right now, to me, is not clear enough yet in the CRM Act. For me, that really needs to be a priority in the next term.
Okay, so making also then demand reduction a bigger part. Some do claim that the focus is very strongly on recycling and less in that area, so a clear message from your side. Jan?
I'm happy, first of all, that I can agree on a lot of what has been just been said. I think the combination between critical raw materials with eco-design has set down the requirements very well and very precisely. I would even say on eco-design maybe a little bit too detailed, but that's another topic. But I think really this question of incentivizing is now what is important. So no more rules, but now incentives. And those incentives might be deposit schemes, rewarding citizens that participate. So this would be my way forward, and research and investment and innovation. So this means replacing critical raw materials, maybe on some in some topics. Having better recycling quotas, because a lot of the critical raw materials cannot be recycled properly today. So I think this is a topic where we need to be better, and then indeed keep the waste here in Europe. I mean, we export critical raw materials back to Africa or other countries, and we should really stop this.
If I can just clarify, how would you do that? Because I think, this leakage, if you like, of Europe's waste from its circular economy clearly is a challenge. It's there. So what would be your, let's say, big picture, your primary way of addressing that?
By incentives for using recycled materials, and having better, via research and innovation, funded by public money, because we need to help on this topic from my point of view, from a public perspective, of having better quotas or outcome from the recycling of waste. This would be my way forward in order to address this topic.
Okay, and Hildegard?
Yeah, regarding recycling, of course I support that, but just to make it a bit interesting for you, what we have seen in the negotiations for the CRMA, at the very last moment, of course, we wanted to increase the target for recycling. And then we sit there and we come up 20, 25%, something like that. I mean, come on. This is what I don't like about it, because we didn't have data. I would have had much more sympathy for your approach to increase each material about 10%. That would be a much better approach. But there was a majority to go for the other, for the other approach. So now we have to see. We have first to collect data, if we have enough, if we can really do it. So we have set a target at the very end of negotiations to be ambitious, where we do not know if we can reach it. So that's actually not my kind of, I want to do politics. Okay, but we were not in a majority for that. And I also think, of course, recycling is important, but it will kick in on the mid and long term. So we should not, have very high expectations. We should work on it, but to build secondary raw material markets is a huge issue. It's as Sara described, collection and everything. It's a big task. So I would just keep expectations under control. And on the demand control or decrease of demand, should we buy less e-vehicles? Should we build less efficient windmills? Should we build less electrolyzers? I mean, we have an increase of critical raw materials because we want to go into the climate technologies. So I do not understand fully what this demand mitigation means. I'm fully for more efficiency, for substitution, but I do not see in all these projections that we will, how should we then control or decrease this demand? By putting bans on people not to buy this or buy that. I don't see this working, actually. So this is why we do not subscribe to a demand control or decrease of demand.
Yeah. We've heard over recent years World Bank data, Eurometaux data, lots of data about demand increases. And the numbers very often are not in 5s or 10s, but hundreds and sometimes thousands of %.
Yes.
So yeah, I suppose I understand it in a way, and Sara, you come in on this, but the idea is as our demand is growing and we try to meet that demand, rather than just focusing on recycling, we keep also a strong eye on trying to mitigate demand in every way we can, so that growth in demand doesn't become so exponential that we simply can't meet it.
And substitution of materials.
Yeah, of course.
You've mentioned substitution. Sara, anything you'd add on this?
Yeah, because, I mean, well, when it comes to the reduction of demand, let me give you a very simple example. If indeed we want every combustion engine car that we have right now, if we want all of those cars to be replaced by an electrical vehicle, then indeed we're going to have a huge increase in demand of critical raw materials and of metal and of all of that. But I don't think that that is what we should do. We should switch the model. We should go, for instance, to sharing mobility, to shared electrical vehicles, to investing in more public transport. I mean, it makes sense from an environmental point of view. It makes sense for a better living environment. It makes sense because it reduces our dependencies and among others when it comes to critical raw materials, etc. Okay. So there are other models you can use to to reduce the demand. Of course, if you are going to continue to be stuck in the same model, perhaps you can't see it, but this is one of the examples that I see where we can really make a difference to curb the demand.
Okay, your point's clear. So there are ways then that by mitigating the demand on sheer number of cars or other vehicles and commercial vehicles, that we can somehow mitigate that growing demand for raw materials at the European level. Right, I want to shift the optic now away from that, keeping an eye on time and other factors, to widen the scope a little bit. Now, we're all aware of this. We know fully. Challenge one is maximize our own capacity in Europe to meet our needs and have more circularity. We've got to keep the industry we have, build it, revitalize it, and make that circular economy work. But we know, and the targets themselves are quite obviously clear about it, we're still going to have to import. But we're going to have to import from reliable third countries. Now, I think we all know, I was talking with Vice President Šefčovič about this just yesterday here in Brussels in a debate on stage, where we were talking about this need for reliable third country partnerships. And we acknowledged, and Eurometaux, as well as everybody else in the room acknowledged, the Commission's doing a lot of work on this. There's a huge list of memorandums of understanding on this. Well, I'm not 110% sure how actionable that is for me tomorrow and the next day, but still, the work's being done and a lot of work's being put in. So when we come to this idea of investing globally then, what are your priorities? We'll go Hildegard, Jan, Sara here. What are your priorities to make sure that Europe can actually secure the access it needs to reliable third country supply in line with our own high ESG standards?
Yeah, as I said, I mean, we have already reliable partners. If you think about Norway, Australia, Canada, Chile, the United States, I think we should, work much closer with them. But again, what I have lived in this parliament at the beginning of this year when we talked about Norway was quite interesting. I mean, Norway has the highest ISG standards, and they dared to talk about deep sea mining, to explore deep sea mining, to mine critical raw materials. You should have seen the discussion in this parliament, I mean, I'm open. If this is less intrusive into the environment than at land, then let's explore it. But the way of distrust which came up in this parliament, in the prejudgment against a country like Norway, I have to say, if we deal with reliable partners like that, then we have a long way to go. Okay. Again, with Australia, we're talking about beef, which we cannot, handle in a free trade agreement. We are super strict about low carbon energy and so on. I mean, we should not teach our reliable partners how they mine. We should put a little bit of confidence in them, first of all. And then, of course, the second category of partners, which are the BRICS, which are super interesting. I've been to Indonesia, to Kenya, to Africa. I mean, there's so much interest, and if you come up with a package, which we did quite well, I think with a global gateway, we do energy, raw materials partnerships, and I was advocating very much also to come up with a package which also helps them to climb up in the value chain, to do processing, because that's what they want, and we can offer companies who do that, because it needs to be a win-win situation. Okay. And I was even advocating to be able to fulfill the 40% processing targets with material which comes from reliable partners. I didn't have a majority for that, but I think we should definitely we come up with these packages, and there's a lot of interest, and I think if we do this in a robust, strategic, coherent way with a raw materials diplomacy, then we will be successful. Okay. This is another thing I would like to see in the next 5 years, how we will be, what kind of results we'll get. But I think, as you said, the Commission, the Parliament, we are on the right way there. But as I said, we need not to come up with only our very European one-sided approach. We need to be open to what our partners want and what they can offer. Okay, so clear from your side, we need to have a little bit more openness in the way we approach these things to be more successful, yeah?
Yeah, I can fully sign on the dotted line on what Hildegard just said. I'm working a lot with African partners. And those African partners, they always tell us, yes, you Europeans, you come with high moral standards, you come with a lot of requests to us, and the Chinese, they're coming, they put the money on the table. And so it's much easier to work with them than to work with us, with you Europeans. And partially they're right. I mean, that's the reality on the ground, and they decide for a partner where they see their benefits. And that's a normal way to do it. Probably if we would be, I don't know, if we would be African politicians, if we would do the same, but at least they have arguments on their side. So I think there's a lot of effort to be put into this fact that we have to convince them that we are the better partners. Because they don't see this today, that we are the better partners.
How are we going to do that?
And we do this if we can show them that there are advantages for them. And this is processing, for example, as you mentioned. This means investment by European countries, but with added value in the country, with jobs in the country for people from the country.
Yeah, if I can here, I mean, Europe is not really investing at the moment, is it, in financing projects in other countries? And you mentioned that China puts the money on the table, and we're not, are we? So
yeah,
you're
no,
advocating what we do.
Because we have partly we have rules, for example, at the EIB that prevent us from doing so, and we need to change this. To be very honest, to be very clear, and we have some rules in national development banks where this is the same. So I think that we need to be more realistic on this, because every project made in a third country with a European partner is much better for environment, for working standards in the country than cooperation from this country with Chinese.
Okay, so clear. So you're suggesting then that we need to be a little bit, we need to change our approach a little bit in how we dialogue with these partners to make a better value proposition to them. Yeah, rather than perhaps trying to sell them our value proposition from our own point of view.
No, but and change the rules in our own European Investment Bank, for example, in order to make those investments possible.
Okay, clear.
Can I add just one thing?
Please do.
ESG, we also should accept that they cannot from the first day accept the full range of our ESG standards, to be very clear. If we come up with this high standards to a country who wants to develop, then we should help them to develop there and get
so
from the informal to the formal sector. So you're talking here then about
having transitional, evolving standards in the partnership.
We should not come and let the bar that high, but we should accept that they start from a low level, check if they really want to change the thing. I mean, this is reliable, you know, if you really want to get out of, improve the situation and help them with our means by development aid and so on to get this framework right, and then to get them at a higher level, to have improvements on the ground. That would be my, just as to complement what I said.
That's clear. And Sara?
Well, I mean, of course, I think we all agree that we need to diversify and lessen our dependencies on, for instance, China. And I think if we want to do that, the key point is really for us to rebuild trust with those third countries. I think that a lot of the people in Africa, in the Latin American countries, etc., right now, have come to realize that if you work together with a global partner like China, they are not out there to help them and their communities. I think that is becoming more and more clear. So I think it's up to us to actually offer them a better deal, to offer them a fair trade deal that really truly benefits the local population, that benefits their economies, that will benefit their environment. How we get there, we can discuss upon it. Is it an action plan with milestones, etc.? I mean, that's all more in the details. But I think that's really the gist of it, and the way that we should do it vis-a-vis what China is doing. That's really what we should use, for instance, some of the funding instruments from the Global Gateway for. I think when it comes to those countries that are more like us, for instance, talking about Australia, I know that Draghi, for instance, has said that perhaps we also there need to go to common procurement, for instance, with a platform. I think that's a way of making sure that all member states actually have access, and that it's not just, you know, again, member states bidding up against each other, as we've seen in the energy crisis. But what I'm very critical about, I mean, our moral standards I'm very proud of them, but some of the things that the Commission now is doing when it comes to critical raw materials, I'm not proud of at all. I mean, if you look at the Memorandum of Understanding with Rwanda, sorry, that is really, really outrageous. We are making a deal where we know that about 90% of the critical raw materials in that deal is actually coming from the DRC. We are financing warlords. I mean, sorry, but we do have legislation on conflict minerals. So, I mean, for me, that's very clearly not the way to go if we want to have secure supply chains.
Okay, clear point made. Last port of call before we transition to the break is something that must not and cannot be ignored. Skills, bridging the skills gap. It's great if we have everything else in place and we have the capacity, the ability, the framework, but we just don't have the people. So, what are your priorities? We're going to need to keep this one short because I think our audience would like their coffee and tea and refreshments. So we've got about 3 or 4 minutes to do this well. So what are your priorities for Europe to bridge its growing skills gap for raw materials and other clean tech sectors? Basically, how can we make this a more attractive choice for people, both reskilling and initial skills, to make sure we have the workforce we need with the right skill levels moving forward? So I'll go on this one. Jan, Sara, Hildegard, can we keep it brief, please?
Yeah, very brief, especially because this is not really a European competence, right? So yeah, I mean, this is about education and so on. So, but we have a good tool in the Net Zero Industry Act, which is the Net Zero Academies. I think that this could be used as a tool in order to attract people to go into these jobs. At the end, we have a clear problem with certain categories of jobs, right? I mean, people. It's hard to interest people in this since a long time into sciences, into science, into mathematics and engineering. So probably we need to as a society do something on this as well in order to show that these are valuable jobs and that an engineer is helping the society as much as, I don't know, a caretaker in a hospital.
Okay. Sara?
Well, I think that we really need to increase the attractiveness of the industry among workers. And I mean, for instance, and I don't want to generalize too much because of course we also have white-collar jobs in the industry, but well, what we see, and that's what the numbers also project, is that we have worker shortages, mainly in those sectors that have poor wages and poor working conditions. So that's really one of the first things I think we need to tackle. Again, I think public procurement there could be a tool to do it. We need healthy working conditions. We really need to beef up some of our European legislation when it comes to that. For instance, talking about mental health, talking about the exposure of hazardous substances. Right now, that's really insufficient. When it comes to training, well, we do have a target in our pillar of social rights, but we are not getting there at all. So there's not enough people right now in the workforce actually taking part in skilling or in training. So what I would do is introduce a legal right to skills training during working hours. I think we also need labor migration, let's be very honest. It's part of the solution. It's not a silver bullet as well, because, I mean, all those other conditions also need to be filled. I don't think that we want to pass on the poorly paid and dangerous work to migrants. I really think, well, we need just transition plans to ensure that the reskilling actually happens on time, that we really avoid job losses, that we give perspective to people. I really think we need to increase the Just Transition Fund also to make sure that that actually happens, to make sure that workers that come, for instance, from the fossil fuel value chains can make the transition to those future-proof industries. And I think all of that can really help in solving that skills gap.
Okay, clear.
Yeah, I'll be shorter. I think there is one important target in the CRMA, that's the 10% domestic mining. Because you say we want to have mining industry in Europe. I think that was not that clear in the past because we're just phasing out, like the coal industry where the mining workers used to work, or the fossil industries, gas and oil. So we have a 10% target, so that means there's a perspective, there's a future. This is what we want. And I think that gives a good signal. Yeah. And in addition, I think we also give the signal we want to have an industrial policy. So we need engineers, we need geologists, we have a lot of things about exploration there. So I think with the CRMA, we gave perspective to young people, and I have a lot of exchange with students, and they check very carefully what's going on at the European level. I'm surprised how much they know about the CRMA, and this gives hope. If you, that's what I said, a strategy, a priority, we need a responsible, competitive mining sector in Europe. I think that's the biggest signal you can give, and of course you can use all the cohesion money and so on, which is out there to retrain workers. But first we have to give the signal that there's a future and a perspective for the sector here in Europe.
Now there's a box I deliberately didn't open in this debate about social license to operate for mining and social acceptance. That's a big debate for another day, but I think what you're saying links into that a little as well. I think, can we all accept that we need to make a stronger case to the general public about this green transition, about critical raw materials, about what they are? And then one could argue that then, if you do that, you create also more of a magnet for young people to want to go into those areas. Why isn't critical raw materials looked at in the same way as solar or wind? Same enabling role. Anyway, that's a thought for another day. So we have literally 15 seconds each. I will go Sara, Hildegard, Jan. I'm already leaving the stage to set the trend, so be quick. Final comment for the room. Last thought or takeaway.
Okay, I think it's clear that we need a strong and an innovative industrial base to provide work for millions of people. I think if we want to do that, we need to have the Green Deal not merely as an environmental commitment, but also as a commitment that is crucial for our competitiveness. I think we really have an unprecedented opportunity to boost our resilience, to create new jobs, to help us meet those climate and environmental targets, but we need European coordination and action. It's clear that there will be some rough geopolitical seas that we need to mention together. But yeah, I think with a really ambitious industrial deal, we need to make a big leap, a bit like the ambition that we had so many years ago when we created our community of coal and steel.
Okay, thank you. A long 15 seconds, but thank you.
Shall I? Okay.
Go on, I'll go on, yeah.
Yeah. I will be very short. If I had a wish in one sentence, this is we need a change in paradigm from a lawmaking factory. We need to become a geopolitical actor as a European Union, putting competitiveness of European companies in the center. And if we deliver on this in the next minute, I will be happy.
Me too.
I can join in this. We have to deliver. We have talked about, we have targets, we have the frameworks, the legislation in place. We have to deliver on the projects. This is my main key. And maybe one last remark to those who hope that the next cycle will be better. If I look at the projections with regard to European Parliament, we'll have not more people who will be committed to an industrial deal, who will be committed MPs. What I have seen, and I say this very clearly, those people who come in from the right wing, they don't participate in political debates, in parliamentary work. So I was surprised to see that you have so much hope for the next cycle. I'm more skeptical in this regard because I think you had a very committed parliament. We have seen, even with the pandemic, we have done legislation, we have worked digitally, we have been very fast, and this also concerns the Critical Raw Materials Act and also the NCR. So I would ask you to consider maybe again and be very conscious and cautious about the decisions and also about the communication and the importance of these elections.
Duly noted. Thank you very much. Break.
so high, you don't when you fall from the sky, you won't break. I've been loving you too long. I've been loving you for
Right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get restarted after our break. I hope you had a refreshing break and some refreshing conversations with the people here present. So now we move on to the fourth of our 5 steps in the event today, our second panel, as you can see on the screen, where our focus is advancing an EU industrial plan for European raw materials resilience. So building on what we've done and what we've heard before, as you can see on the screen here, we have a range of speakers. I'm going to nominate them, and then I'll ask for an applause, and then they'll come up to the stage. So we'll have Kerstin, the Director General of DG GROW, Julia Poliscanova, the Senior Director from Transport and Environment, Stian Madshus, the Senior Vice President of Vianode, Judith Kirton, the General Secretary of IndustriALL, and last but not least, Peter Tom Jones, the Director of the Institute for Sustainable Metals and Minerals at KU Leuven. So can we give them a very warm round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen? And can I bring you up? So, to keep you with us so you know what we're doing, what am I going to do? What I'm going to do is give them a quick question each to get their initial thoughts. Then we'll give them a chance to reflect on what they've heard from each other. And then I'm going to open straight up to you for your questions as well. So as you're listening to their initial comments, you're listening to the interchange between them, please be thinking about the questions you want to answer, answered here in the room. We have a couple of microphones ready, so I'll do my very best to respect the order that the hands go up. But I want this debate to be an interactive one that's not just from the stage to you, but from you to the stage as well, ladies and gentlemen. So do get your questions ready, and I'll do my best to tackle as many of them as we can in this debate. So with that in mind then, let's get started. And Kerstin, I'll come first to you with an opening question from my side. So we've been talking already a lot around this issue, but the Critical Raw Materials Act, of course, is becoming law very soon, next month. And looking to the next policy cycle after the European elections, where there's a lot of expectation in the room, of course, what for you needs to happen as priority so Europe can deliver on the Critical Raw Materials Act and have that resilience that we need?
Well, thank you very much, and welcome everyone, also from my side. It's all about scale and speed. And I suppose you do not want a second Critical Raw Materials Act. You know, sometimes new legislators have ideas about erecting legislative monuments and more of them. No, we need to implement. So this is the super priority for me. Implement the Critical Raw Materials Act. And it actually starts before May, because on the 30th of April, this is my commercial break, there will be a meeting and the opportunity for all of you to understand how to pitch your strategic projects when we do the call end of May. And I suggest many of you to be in this. This creates, to avoid frustration on your part when you pitch and then it's not the right one, and on our part, because we want to really focus on very good projects, and know there are a lot around, to put them through the strategic project mechanism that we've developed, which is actually the superhighway to financing. On the implementation, I mean, there are the permitting rules. Member states will have to have in place for your strategic projects that I expect to be selected still this year, you know, around end of summer. I might remind everyone that the end of summer is in September. To actually go and become FIDs. Because the problem I see with a lot of things, but it's not only in Europe, it's also in the US, that the level of project to FID, you know, it's like a peau de chagrin. In Europe, I heard 5% of projects actually turn into FIDs around the bigger clean tech sector. The US, apparently 20%. I haven't seen very robust, you know, to sustain this, but I mean, there seems to be a difference in price. So we need FIDs, and we need these investments to happen fast, because that again will create new market perspectives. The member states will have had to put into place these new permitting rules. When I go to member states at the moment, I ask, where are you with the permitting rules? Yeah, I mean, essentially is removing rules that they have and applying instead what we have in the Critical Raw Materials Act. Again, if you have the feeling it's not happening where your project is or where you are, let us know so we can put a bit of pressure onto that. This is also part of implementation. And then I want to show you, I showed it yesterday already, this. This is for me where we have to go. This is green nickel. And this could be a green premium market. Now, we can produce, of course, green nickel, but it's not a market, it's not a business case if there's no demand. So now I'm looking at the demand side. And the demand side in Europe is called 300,000 tons, mainly for stainless steel, but also for batteries. And it's rising for batteries. And in the stainless steel part, there is a huge increasing defense applications part as well. So there is potential. If we create a real market for green nickel, then all the fluctuation that we see at the moment, which, you know, minus 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% on nickel, because there's a lot of nickel put onto the market via Indonesia. There's talk of some manipulation of the price even at exchanges. If we decouple from that kind of broader nickel market and we come to the green nickel market, maybe have a quoted green nickel market, then, you know, it's a different investment case because it means no volatility, less volatility, and secured kind of offtake. And that's why I think we should stop talking amongst ourselves on metals and raw materials, but we need to bring the others in. Car industry, defense industry, battery industry, and we have to make that business case for green nickel. That's where I really see the priority for us in rolling out, and not inventing new rules, rolling out the Critical Raw Materials Act.
Okay, so not a second Critical Raw Materials Act, scale and speed, your example of green nickel and our need to create real markets for these things. Clear, clear. Julia, moving on to you then. I mean, transport environment, I think for many in the room has been quite consistently clear in recent times that you want a step up in EU industrial policy. It's something you've called for repeatedly. To compete, as we've talked about earlier today, to compete on the global level. Okay. So where for you, in terms of priorities, should the next Commission, the next European legislature, whatever we want to call it, act to secure our raw materials resilience, while at the same time making sure it's never at the expense of our really high ESG standards that we own?
Yes, thanks. Thanks a lot also for having TNE here. I think it's a very, very topical time to talk about that. A lot has already been said. I agree with so much on the previous panel. I think the manifesto is really excellent. Some of the points could have been written by TNE. So that it's really good to see. I think there's a lot of actually alignment for those of us that do want to see a true green industrial policy in Europe. So I'd like to maybe focus on three areas as an introductory remarks, and I'm sure we'll talk about other things. Well, first of all, this entire agenda of implementation. We very much support also streamlined laws. No one wants to have bureaucratic procedures. But for us, it's quite important to keep the Green Deal as that clear vision, not spend another 5 years reforming this again, but focus on effective, smart, ambitious implementation. That's not the same as deregulation. They're very different things. So let's get going on the implementing acts, put it in place, so there's a real case to localize this production in Europe. And there I completely agree actually with you, Kerstin, when you said scale and speed when it comes to implementing the Critical Raw Materials Act. And when we say implementing CRMA, we really mean going quickly and not spending too much time on setting up the board or the templates, but really selecting the projects, supporting them, getting them built. And as we select them, and not only focusing on mining, but not forgetting a really critical processing stage in Europe. You can mine here, you can do a battery here, but if you have nothing in between, it will still go somewhere else. So that's really important. The second key point from our perspective is something that is really missing from our industrial policy today, and that is a European Green Deal investment agenda. We do have some funding here and there. Sometimes it's difficult to apply. We have a good Green Deal industrial plan, but we really need to see a much larger European, what we are calling for, climate and social investment plan, including a Green Deal industrial pillar of at least 400 billion from now to 2035. And I fully support those that say a lot can be done with private capital, but also just like Fatih Birol is right now telling the ministers, it's not enough. There needs to be a lot more public investment, and it needs to be targeted, and it needs to really focus on scaling in Europe. And the final point I will mention, also coming here from an NGO perspective, we do often say we have highest ESG standards. And on many things, We do have high standards. But we have to actually remember, as the manifesto points out, we haven't opened new mines in Europe for 15 years. So some things have become outdated while other regions were innovating. And in our view, we are well overdue reviewing the Extractive Waste Directive. It's not because we want a beast and we have nothing else to do than review laws, but we want it to quite in a targeted way require best practice, which changed since 2006 when the directive was put in place, and today it's filtered tailings, and that's really important to us, so we can really get behind that renaissance of new mines in Europe, knowing there's also low impact. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Julia. And crystal clear your points there then about implementation. You used the phrase effective, smart implementation that I noted. And also talking about the need for that 400 billion you noted by 2035, with the point that you made very clearly for me that private investment alone will simply not be enough, and it needs to be balanced with that public investment. Okay, with that in mind, Stian, I'll move on to you for some opening comments. So, look, Vianode, for those in the room that don't know, you're focused on the graphite area, I believe. So you're readying to open a new battery graphite production facility in Norway, if I'm correct, yes? Backed by EU funding. So we talk about accessibility to funding, but you've been successful there. What support, from your perspective, from the company perspective, do you need? What support and incentives do you still need from Europe as an entity to make sure that your project, not only now it's going to get up and running, can actually flourish and grow and move forward?
First of all, thanks a lot for the invitation to come here and speak and share a little bit experience of an industrial really scale up of an industry that will have a very high importance for Europe. So it's the graphite, just to put it in context. You mentioned nickel. Actually, that's the two major parts of batteries. So graphite, you'll have around 70 kilograms of graphite in every car. So that's one of the key elements. Today, of course, there is not much production in Europe, totally depending on imports from Asia, and that means mainly China. What we are doing now is scaling up and producing these materials in new technology, fundamentally using less energy, and getting almost 90% reduction in the CO2 footprint of this production. So we have been scaling up now through the steps with an industrial pilot in 2021, technology center in 22, and now we are soon opening, after the summer, the first full-scale production plant in Norway. And this is where we have now recently got funding through the IPCEI vehicle. We've also secured a large-scale site in Norway for potential large-scale expansion, and we're also working in parallel in North America. So we really acknowledge in the EU now that there has been a lot done, achieved a lot both in the policy support and incentives over the last years. So it's really helping, Critical Raw Materials Act, Net Zero Industry Act, etc. At the same time, the urgency to align, in a way, on the competitive landscape with particularly North America is critical. And let's face it, we have a lot of catching up to do. China has been building up this industry for more than 10 years now, and we have to do it in a few years and get to the real speed and scale, as you mentioned, Kerstin. So we have signed the Antwerp Declaration, fully support those points made. This includes an action plan to strengthen European business cases, because we need proper business cases, otherwise you will have no investment. And funding to de-risk private investments, both on the OPEX and CAPEX side, and in particularly boost the demand for net zero, low carbon and circular products. We find especially the latter part here is where the shoe really pinches. There must be demand for locally made, sustainable and high performance products. And there must be willingness to pay for this and pay for the value that lies in that. I come from Norway, and a lot has been done on the EV adoption. We're now at new car sales above 90% share of electric vehicles. So this has been extensive government measures. The policy is certainly not flawless, but just like with electric cars, we are really depending on the choices that customers actually make, in this case, the end user. So we really believe it's important to empower the consumers, both businesses and private, to choose net zero and circular products based on transparent product and environmental carbon footprints. and then lead the way through public procurement, private buyer initiatives endorsed by the EU. So that's my opening.
Okay, some clear points from your side. I picked up on, okay, the positive comments around the existing legislation, talking about we need to level that playing field. We'll go into that after. About the need to strengthen the business cases and especially de-risk when it comes to investment, both OPEX and CAPEX, I heard you mention. And you mentioned the local markets that we need to have for these products. We touched upon this, of course, in our earlier discussions as well. I'll just re-note that obviously we have to have those markets so that those products that we do produce can actually then make a viable business case. And you've touched upon also empowering consumers there, and the issue we've also previously touched upon, but I want to dig more into, about public procurement as a way of creating lead markets as well. So with that in mind, Jude, if I can, we'll move on to you. So a disclaimer here, ladies and gentlemen, some of you may or may not know, what I'm going to say now, you've sounded the alarm about deindustrialization. Disclaimer, I was moderating that event a few weeks ago. Okay, so, but I'm not going to take away from your thunder there. You sounded a data-based alarm with some new facts and figures about the scale and the ongoing nature of deindustrialization in Europe.
Yeah.
Not to be joked about, the effect it has on our businesses, on our prosperity, on our social fabric, none of us can deny. Okay. So with that in mind, what are you asking for at the European level to make sure that we can keep our capacity for strategic raw materials, metals, but at the same time balancing that against the social dimension, making sure that we're securing new investments that we know we need and quality jobs?
Yeah, and I think actually Adina and Chris set the scene really well at the beginning, just from the perspective of the metal sector. But if we look across manufacturing across Europe, we're really at a crossroads of whether we head towards a dystopia of deindustrialization or whether we take our own destiny in our hands and we decide that we don't want that deindustrialized future and we put the political and financial weight behind an industrial plan for Europe. And we were, as Industrial Europe, we're the European Trade Union Federation for Manufacturing, Mining and Energy Workers. So we cover this full supply chain from the mine to the end of the production line, if you like, and our calls are from the perspective of workers right across that value chain. But clearly, in energy-intensive industries and foundation industries, as we think of them, the situation is really critical, partly because of the energy price. So energy prices are extremely at the root. I mean, this is something very fundamental that we have to deal with, and it was in that context that we engaged with CEFIC at the time in the drafting and the development of the Antwerp Declaration. We're a founder signature of the Antwerp Declaration. It's quite unusual that you would have all of these CEOs, but also industrial trade unions from across Europe signing up to this same agenda. We don't necessarily like everything in it. I don't think anybody likes everything in the Antwerp Declaration. But what's very clear is that it's a call for a European industrial plan and an investment plan. And the difficulty, and it hasn't been mentioned by anybody here, and I think it's very important to put it into this context, is we fully subscribe to what Julia's saying, that we have an investment gap in Europe, about 400 billion euros a year in terms of reaching our investment needs, public investment gap. We need to ensure that we have the private de-risking. We need to have the framework to bring in private capital, but we know that public investment is critical also for bringing in that private investment. And next week in the European Parliament, members of the European Parliament will vote on new fiscal rules, economic governance rules, which will effectively bring back a period of austerity in Europe, which will tie the hands in terms of that public investment. We've done a significant piece of research with the New Economics Foundation, which shows that only 3 member states have the fiscal firepower to make the investments to implement that industrial deal. Those member states, Denmark, Sweden, and Ireland, fine. But what happens in our industrial fabric across the rest of Europe? We need to have a serious discussion about public investment, and industrial policy in Europe and all of the ambitions of the Antwerp Declaration are completely incompatible with an agenda which brings in austerity. And let's be honest, why does this matter for industrial workers? If you go back to 2009, 2010, we can see that we've lost 2.5 million manufacturing jobs in Europe. But the biggest drop of those jobs was when the last round of austerity was imposed. The austerity measures will bring deindustrialization. And therefore, we need to have a grown-up conversation about how we create this industrial and investment agenda. And it will involve public finance as well. And finance ministers and central banks will have to play their role as well. The other thing in the Antwerp Declaration, which is central for us, is the Antwerp Declaration is an industrial plan to implement the Green Deal and ensure good quality jobs in Europe. And good quality jobs mean talking about all of the foundations of the social license to operate in a sector particularly in relation to the CRMA. We were very strong advocates of the Critical Raw Materials Act. We want to see the projects coming through because, as I said to Kerstin, I think on Tuesday, we've been together every day this week, workers across Europe are increasingly cynical. They see what's happening on the ground in their workplaces. They see those aluminium plants which are kind of down or are closed. They see the dangers of what's coming. And what we need are strong examples of success of this agenda. We don't necessarily need all of the 70 projects all at the same time, but we need to be demonstrating to the public that this is really a job-rich, job-guaranteeing, employment-friendly and community-friendly agenda. And that's where the ESG standards are critically important for building that social acceptance. So we were really pleased with the framework of the CRMA. But now, why do we have to wait? It's on the statute book. We know it's coming, and we should now move at a speed which is necessary in the context of the industrial catastrophe that we're in. Otherwise, we'll already have taken the road towards deindustrialization, and we'll have a nice piece of paper for the European Historical Archives. Thanks.
Okay, a clear and powerful message from your side. Okay.
Well, to be honest, I think 2 weeks to implementation is not such a huge delay. No. 30 April, I mean, I just want to recall that date.
Okay, noted, and we'll come back to that as well. Okay, so Tom, I don't like quoting people because I often get it wrong. So let me paraphrase and then you elaborate for me. Europe is sleepwalking into an abyss versus Chinese competition. Can I attribute that to you? Is that fair?
I guess other people have said that as well, but it's the opening sentence of our film, yes.
Okay.
That's right. And after hearing the final statement of Hildegard, I'm even more afraid because you can see what's coming after the next European elections when we'll have even more people in the parliament with no clue whatsoever of what is happening in this world, and with no plans and no ideas. So, yes, that's even worse. If I may summarize the present situation, and I will not use my Monty Python scene again, because
you promised me you wouldn't.
I wouldn't.
Come on. Yeah,
I wouldn't.
okay.
So I'm not going to talk about the
Right.
People's Judean Front and the fact that we're always having meetings and no action. But I want to use another one. Football. I like football, as you know. Okay. We're in the Champions League final. We're 1-0 down. We're in the 90th minute. They've just announced 5 minutes of extra time, 1 minute per year until we're in 2030. We know we need to score. If we don't score, that's it, game over. So to stay in the game, we need to score, and we have 5 minutes of extra time. So what do? Do you still talk about how to possibly attack? Do you still think about, what
no
is our
timeouts
strategy?
in football.
No, you don't have timeouts, no. So you have to go for it. You really have to go for it, and I think that is the present predicament that we have. So I fully agree with what you said. It's now or never. It's also in your brilliant document. And when I look at your numbers, 10 new mines, 15 new refineries, and 15 recycling plants in 5 years' time. So that's the ambition. Well, what is the reality? The reality is not that we're not actually opening those new ones. The reality is that we're closing existing ones. that we are putting existing mines on care and maintenance. The Boliden zinc mine in Ireland is a good example. The nickel mines, we're speaking about clean nickel, but we have nickel mines in Greece, which are on care and maintenance. And then we have this unbelievable thing which recently happened, I think it was the beginning of this week, with the Boliden, not the Boliden, the BASF Harjavalta case, where they have one of the cleanest pecan factories in the world that was going to be produced. And what do we do in Europe? We take away the environmental permits and we force the company to start the negotiations to lay off people. So if you go to the metaphor of having kids who have exams, and your kids come home with a report of 95% on every topic in their report, do you tell those kids, no, you should have 100%? Is that what you're going to say? Because that's what we do. We expect, we demand that our companies have a 100% score. And then we don't give the permits. And at the same time, we then allow that the same products are being produced at the other side of the world where they get a 40% score. So we are killing the ones who are having the 97% score, and we are supporting the ones with the 40% score. And I think that's, for me, the present situation. So when we talk about the actual title, so advancing an EU industrial plan, rather just to repeat everything we've said, I think the main discussion today should be about the strategic projects. How do we get them now defined, endorsed, and implemented? And I would really ask all the industry people here in the audience, and I know there's quite a few who have potential strategic projects, to really come forward with them. So rare earths, we have Sokli, we have Fen Complex, we have Bergeir. For copper, we have Laver. For lithium, we have Keliber in Finland. We have Beauvoir in France. We have Mina de Barroso in Portugal. So we do have a number of potential new mines. We have new lithium refineries in the pipeline. We have battery recycling plants, the one of Umicore, for example. So there is several that are there potentially. But when I hear some of these voices saying, yeah, but maybe we're not 100% ready yet to submit our strategic projects, say, no, don't do that. You've got to do it now. If you don't do it now, then the extra time will indeed be over and it's game over. So please, let's not wait for the 100% perfect score for your strategic project. Submit it now, let's endorse it, and let's make sure that we can actually implement it. And then, of course, we get into a new discussion, which we can take up later, and that is how will the anti-mining and anti-everything, anti-banana people, how will they react to those strategic projects? Because that's, of course, the next thing we can expect. Yeah. There's going to be huge opposition. And then it's the question, how is Europe, how is the European Commission going to react towards the dictatorship of this tiny, highly vocal minority? Are we going to let them hijack the agenda once more? And in the meantime, the 5 minutes of our extra time will be over. Or are we going to say this time, look, the pendulum has swung too far. You've had your chance to comment and to provide your input, but now it's really the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and we have to score now. And the strategic projects for me are the goals that we need to score in the extra time.
Okay, clear from your side about what you're saying. So we've got the football analogy, we've got the school report analogy, and we have puddings too. But clear points as well, though, about the ambition that we're going to need and the issues that we face. Kerstin, quite a few points have been brought up here by the speakers that followed you. Is there anything you want to reflect on what you've heard?
Well, I heard a lot about supply, and I do think it's important that we get the demand in as well. Okay. And this is, you know, when you submit your projects, and you submit a project and you say, I have an off-taker. This is kind of, I have the OPEX already, because that off-taker is going to pay for my operation. That makes it an even better project. And I think this is how we have to think about getting going in a meaningful way. Because we would not win of having only supply, having a lot of supply, supporting a lot of supply, and then there's nobody to buy it. And I also want to say, one of you said, you know, it's not only about the mining, it's also about the refining. And refining today is the technology of recycling tomorrow. This is also important, and that we also have targets in the Critical Raw Materials Act. So I love refining. I mean, refining is like torture a rock, chemically, thermically, whatever you do to it. But it's also high technology. And I really want to launch us to think in terms of value chain. And the bigger, the thicker the value chain that's connected to your project, the bigger the lighthouse effect of that project will be.
Okay, any other reflections we've got on the panel?
Could I jump in straight on there? Because I think I fully agree with you about the demand side and the importance of lead markets, the importance of using eco-design in the way that we are at the moment, for example, for the steel sector. But I think there also there's a role for the Commission in looking at some of the business models of those off-take sectors. Because what we see, for example, in the automotive sector is an enormous downward pressure in terms of cost competitiveness and cost cutting, which has produced a situation that we're in today where it's more affordable for all of the supply chain to be delocated and relocated somewhere else. So I think there needs to be also, that it's very important to build in mechanisms and I hate to say, I don't like the word incentives all that much in this context, but some conditionalities would be really good in the overall framework to ensure that that full European value chain is actively supported. If we look at, for example, what's happening in Sweden, where you have the ore mine in the north, and it naturally flows south as well because of geography, but you have the ore mine in the north going into SSAB and other producers of metals, and then you come down into the automotive sector, into Scania and the others. These kind of approaches for us are really important, and conditionalities have a really critical role to play in using public money to go to where local jobs and European value chains are.
I can say we're utterly determined to flex our single market muscle for this, which goes through public procurement standards, but also convening hub function. I just come from a meeting with cities. I mean, the amount of materials that cities need to decarbonize themselves is huge, but it's a demand that has never been aggregated. I tried it in a previous life for buses, but that was also very difficult. But there's so much demand, and if we manage to aggregate that, that could also be a lead market. And most of that market goes through public procurement. And here we are with single market muscle.
Okay, Judith.
I wanted to come in also on the conversation about offtake, because I think it is a very important conversation. What we see right now happening is that you have a really developed, cheaper supply chain in the east and a lot of subsidies in the west, right? So if you are a downstream company, a car maker, for example, or battery maker, understandably it's quite, you're like, right, I'll go for something which is a bit cheaper. So the key is really to create policy here that would require downstream companies to purchase, at least in part, locally sourced materials. And there's a few ways you can do it. And you can do it via sustainability requirements, right? So if you want that battery on the EU market, this is the maximum CO2 threshold you should have. And I know we're getting there, but it would be good to get there quicker and simpler to say, look, 50 kilograms, you're below that, welcome, you're above that, no, sorry. And that really incentivizes local. If not, we can simply go for some sort of local content requirement. And today, in the short term, a way to do that can be to attach it to some of the money that we give directly to downstream companies. So we will have the battery fund under the innovation fund. We would have liked it expanded also to processing, etc. But if it's really not possible, why don't we say, look, you get the grant, quite substantial grant, right, as a battery manufacturer, but as a condition, source 50% of your materials from Europe, right? So it's another way to get those off-takers a lot more interested to really, make those higher ESG projects here more bankable.
Thomas, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think we really need a paradigm shift in Europe in the way we think about production in the post-neoliberal world order. Because that for me is very clear. The neoliberal free trade-based WTO model type of globalization is over. Many people in European politics have not understood that yet, and they still live with these glasses of the old world order and look at the present system. Whereas the Chinese and the Americans are already playing with the new rules. So as someone said in a previous debate, we are trying to play football, but the other team is playing American football. So obviously, it is then very difficult to compete. So I think Europe really needs to understand that we need to move towards this more Europe story, made in Europe story, not 100%, but at least as much as possible. And there we see this disconnection indeed between the upstream and the downstream part, because we are used to the world order of decades ago, where it was perfectly normal just to focus on the high added value downstream high-end industry sectors. And we just sourced our materials from elsewhere in the world. We export the moral, social, environmental responsibility, even for the refining actually, and we just bought the materials in cheaply, and we were able to do this. But as a result, we have created an industry here in Europe where we have loads of single units, and they are not connected to each other. So they all operate as single units. They all try to maximize their profitability, but there is no integration. There is no master plan on top of that to make sure that you have these different units working together, that you have off-take agreements, and that you have a system in which they can all prosper at the same time. But for that to come to fruition, we really need a complete change in political mindset that will have to fundamentally be different and respect or understand that the world has changed and moved on considerably, and that we will need to produce our own materials from our own mines to a certain extent, not 100% for anything, but at least for some, and do the same thing for the refinery, complemented by imports from outside of Europe. But if you look at the battery value chain, and the key element, of course, being lithium at this moment, and let's be honest, what is the present situation for lithium in Europe? We have 0 operational lithium mines. We have 0 operational lithium refineries. There are 2 being built, but they're not operating yet. And we have, as far as I know, 0 commercial scale lithium-ion battery recycling plants at this moment. So our scores for lithium are hopeless at the moment. So how are we going to change that? Well, we will have to develop the refineries. We will have to develop the battery plants, the PCAM plants, the CAM plants, and the final gigafactories. But if you then see what we're actually doing, I already mentioned the example of BASF in Finland, we then block such a plant from operating. Is that really the best we can do? I mean, that's completely insane. And that is in a country, Finland, that we use as one of the best examples in Europe, that a country with some kind of a master plan, thinking about vertical integration from mine to clean tech product. So if even in such a country we cannot get it right, I mean, what are we going to do in Portugal or Spain?
Okay, so you're calling for this vertical integration, this change of approach. Who does it? When do they do it? Because we're talking about urgency. How does that manifest? So the idea is clear, but how do we make that happen then?
For that we need people who are actually into the European politics, but this is terra incognita, as we say in Latin. It's unknown territory, because it's completely against the DNA of our economic European system of all those decades. We've always thought in terms of individual units. And we have to now learn from the Chinese, because the Chinese have been brilliant in setting this up. They had this long-term master plan. They have looked at the vertical integration with all the different units. They've accepted that there would be losses within that chain for some players for some time, and it changes. Sometimes it's upstream, sometimes it's downstream, but they have this master plan. They have this view on top of everything. So I'm not the person who has to do it. I'm working for a university. So I am a metallurgist.
Don't think we need, the mega master plan, and probably some of you come from planned economies or have an experience. So what I really think is we need, to get the business case. It's the business case that makes the change. And if I look at gallium, now, we don't get gallium anymore. We have all of it from China, and we get none of it now because it stopped. But we need gallium, so there's a business case for gallium. In the beginning, the off-taker said, oh, I'll get it from somewhere, but now the price has doubled, and it's still going up. We're starting to get into a business case for gallium produced in Europe. Because the biggest Armageddon for any business case is that, oh, your input is no longer coming. And that we've seen now. And graphite, another case. And that was probably helped your project. And these long-term hedging, purchasing agreement is in fact hedging against that type of disruption. And I have to say that policymakers, the big Armageddon is, I promise something in front of everyone and then I can't deliver. So what we promised is, another 200 gigawatt wind power until 2030. If you translate that into wind towers, something like 40,000 wind towers. If you look what goes into a wind tower, it's essentially metal. Okay, steel, you're not about steel, but there's other metals that go into it. Now, that is also from the public side a reason to support and mobilize the funds and prioritize the funds that we have, public funds, to de-risk that particular thing, because that's what we promised. And by the way, we know that that will bring down the energy price, and that will then, again, help the business case of everybody else. So I think it's really the understanding of the business case that will drive this transformation. And I'm very confident that now, having aligned all the stars in the Critical Raw Materials Act, having aligned our understanding of supply chains, having aligned our understanding also of demand, of substitution, this will help to bring everybody on board. Our problem is, of course, we don't have one budget. We have the EU budget, small. We have national budgets, some bigger than others. We have private money, and how can they all, you need two to tango here, you need more to tango. But how do we bring them all and align them on de-risking us from dependencies and getting the transformation.
Possibly with urgency if we follow Tom's concept of being in the last minutes of the game and losing the game. But, okay.
But Kerstin,
Stian,
if I'm asking...
Tom, if I can, quickly,
okay,
Stian wants to come and I'll bring you in, okay? Stian, please.
So I just want to build on this, like the pull from the customer side and really support the pull for local and sustainable materials. I think it's important to be able to do this a bit upfront, so we don't come in that dire situation where we're actually faced with not having the materials. And of course the industry, that's the industry's job, and we will be competitive in the long run. But we have to face the reality that we have to build up a completely new value chain, a new industry in a very short time, and you need to do it at the speed, but also the scale. Because you can't expect a new industry to be extremely efficient, and you made all the right choices in the first round. And thus you need some support to get across that hurdle, get these operations into proper scale, so we can actually improve from that level and make sure that we are competitive in the long run and don't have the need for eternal kind of incentives and support. And that's very important, but we need to invest something up front now, and that's urgent.
And you feel that that's not happening to the right level at the moment?
Yes, and that's a little bit what I said in the intro. It's a lot of good things that has been put in place, and the toolbox is kind of getting more complete, but it's about putting more behind it now and quickly now. Yeah.
Okay, and Tom, you wanted to come in there.
I want to come back to the story of the business case. Obviously, it's extremely important, but what I would want to say is that we need to look at the business case of the individual players in the supply chains. They have to be good, but we also have to look at the business case on a meta level, the business case of the different business cases. And that's where we in Europe struggle against the Chinese. Because the Chinese have done that. They have made sure that the business case of the whole supply chain is working. And by doing so, they have been able to control the prices either of the raw materials, the refined materials, or the final clean tech products. We see this in cycles. Rare earth, for example, is a brilliant one. I think this is a really interesting one we can learn from. During the rare earth crisis, you know, the prices of rare earths went up 700%. This triggered European Commission to launch a number of research innovation calls in Horizon 2020 and even FP7. And we generated numbers of technical flow sheets to produce rare earths, to recycle rare earths. By the time we were ready with our flow sheets and with our processes, the Chinese opened the floodgates again. The price dropped down again, and all the companies that developed flow sheets for rare earths went bankrupt. And you see the same thing happening now for the battery raw materials. So the Chinese also have this in cycle. So they make sure that either the prices go rock bottom, so our raw material producers can't compete with the Chinese on those terms. At certain moments, they will close the gate so that the prices go up, and then suddenly the downstream players are in trouble. So it's always somebody who is in trouble in Europe. Okay. We have to make
but
sure
hang on,
if you have
this, a separate market, then that game is over. That's the whole point.
And I remember for Michael Staffas, the CEO of Bolide, saying they produce low carbon copper. And Aurubis does the same thing, by the way. So they have this extremely low carbon copper compared to the global standards. What is the premium they get at this moment for their low carbon copper? It is 1%. 1% premium for low carbon copper. Obviously, this is not the way to do it. For nickel, we have the same. I asked the question to Bolide Naryavalta, do you get a premium for your low carbon nickel? The answer is no. Nobody wants to pay for low carbon nickel. So I fully agree that if we could create a separate market for ESG friendly low carbon nickel, low carbon copper would be a new situation. But how do we do that? That's of course a big question.
Single market muscle. Single market muscle. Let's see it then. Come on. Right. Questions, ladies and gentlemen. We've touched upon a number of points here. I see we've got one or two in the room already. If you've got a question, get that hand up. We can have a microphone over, please, this gentleman over here. If you can let us know who you are, and if we can have your question for our panel, please.
Yeah, it's working. So my name is Jasper van Zon. I work for a company called Nearstar. We are in the critical and also in the commodity metals business, zinc, lead, and a number of critical raw materials which are in the zinc concentrate. So I think this is a very good discussion, by the way, on what can really unlock the potential that we have in Europe with regards to investments in critical raw materials. So thank you for sharing your views. But I must say that it is a tough one, because at the end of the day, we've been talking about gallium. We are looking at the feasibility for potential germanium-related projects in Europe. We are concerned about exactly what Tom Jones was talking about. What if indeed we are going to invest, tens of millions, hundreds of millions in European capacity? It will take us 2.5, 3 years to get that production online. And then at the end of the day, China indeed opens the, you call it floodgates, price is gone, and our business case is evaporating. So we would ask if there would be a possibility for for Europe to consider, are there any commercial de-risking mechanisms on the back end of the investments? Certain price floor mechanisms or strategic offtake by governments, countries, certain investment funds, etc., that could at least help you with the first 4 or 5 years of production, and then the commercial market can take over again. So just something to consider. Thank you.
Echoing a little what we heard from Stian about that need for extra support. Who wants to pick that up? Kerstin, can I ask you to comment on that first?
I don't know nothing about football, but I understand you have to disrupt the game, and this is what we have to do, that game that you described, and creating the business case, having long-term purchase agreement from the ones who actually want to use germanium and who are getting increasingly concerned about the big disruption that this might, not having any might bring to their business case. So they are paying. So we have to get them to pay a premium for that resilience. And then there are other rules on standards, on conditionalities, which was already said, for public funding, where we could actually build in that hedge. And, companies hedge for all kinds of events in the life of a company. So also financial services sector, when they see how serious we are about creating these markets in Europe, I'm sure people will come in with bright ideas how to develop financial hedging modules. But the advantage is that we now see the game we want to interrupt. Some have seen it before, but nobody was ready to disrupt the game. So I think there is a change, and that will change also the business case.
Okay.
And continue with the germanium.
Yep. I see, Judy, you want to come in, Jude, as well? So I'll go Jude, and then Julia, and then we'll see. Okay.
Yeah, and just to kind of continue on that I think it's really striking the way that the European raw materials policy framework has accelerated in the last few years. That there has been, when you think about what there was 10 years ago in terms of analysis of the raw materials situation to what we have on the table now, just to give some credit also on that. But I think one of the questions from our side, this was a long-term demand of the trade union movement, that we have this proactive industrial policy, that raw materials policy was part of that. There is, I think, a step further that we also need to reflect on about whether in Europe we need to think about strategic stocks of certain materials, and whether in order to avoid that it's not just a question of the long-term prices guaranteed, but it's also thinking about avoiding the situation where we can suddenly be cut off for one reason or another, and the role that strategic stocks policy would play within that for the materials for green tech in particular, because we know that the demand for these materials might differ according to innovation in different battery technologies or in different applications, but we broadly, you said it earlier, David, we know that the demand is only going to increase for this selection of critical raw materials in the coming years. So maybe that approach of stockpiling, a kind of strategic stock quantity is part of the discussion. I'm not giving a percentage or an idea of the quantity, but it's not yet on the table as far as we're aware.
Yes. Yeah, just briefly on that. Yeah.
Just in reply to this, we're suffering from the mask syndrome here. When COVID broke out, 36 measures were adopted to keep masks in the country, in the relevant countries, which was terrible because, you know, the countries that really needed the masks, these masks, they didn't get them, and they were kept in the countries where people did not yet need them. And this is the same with stockpiling. I would love stockpiling, and we've tried it with the CHIPS Act, we tried it with the Critical Raw Materials Act, we tried it with what's now called IMERA, the Single Market Crisis Instrument, and member states were not ready to go there, always with the same indignation, how I do take care of my stocks and then I have to give them to somebody else. This is a culture question, and you can really help us on this. I do think for the disruption point, but also for the price volatility point, having meaningful stockpiling would be great. There's some language, I can't remember in the Draghi speech or in the letter report to that extent, so there's hope.
Okay, Julia.
Yes, just a brief comment on that, on the financing tools. I think what we often do in Europe is we focus on capex, that's where most is, right? You build your factories, and projects, like we like kind of to count the projects. And what we're really missing is shifting that to some OPEX support. So it would really help that scale and making it output-based. So the more tons of lithium you produce, or cathode kind of tons, the more you support. And just to bring one statistics, which I find so interesting, in the US right now, permits to build battery gigafactories, because of that OPEX support, are shorter than in China, because they're all rushing to produce to get the output-based funding. And I think that's a really good example of what we can also shift some of our programs to this output-based OPEX.
Okay, now, have we got any further questions in the audience here? I see 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to go left. So can we keep those hands up, please, so I can see them? So the gentleman here first, please, and then the lady next after. And then I'll come to this side as well, but I will come to you. Please.
Yes, Philip Giro, Liège. Just a general question for the panel. I come from Canada. Canada is known as a mining-friendly country, but it's really hard not to permit in Canada. And if you look at the realization of the Inflation Reduction Act, permitting is not increasing. So that situation is the same as in Europe. Meanwhile, and I've noticed this over the past 5-6 years, and I've been in the mining industry for 40 years, Saudi Arabia is taking off in base metals, in rare earth, and they're moving out of petroleum. Like, well, they're staying in petroleum, but they're moving into metals. So isn't it a broader question of the West versus the BRICS? And is there certain cultures that are better at mining now? General questions for everybody.
Okay, so can we still mine in Europe or not?
Or in the Western world.
Or in the Western
in the
world.
States and Canada.
Okay, noted. Does someone want to pick that up quickly?
Well, that will be the proof of the pudding question, of course. We know we have 5 minutes of extra time. We know where the lithium deposits are. We know where the rare earth deposits are. For rare earths, it's actually quite simple. If we open one mine, our dependency problem is solved. It's just about one mine. For lithium, okay, we might need to open 5 or 10, but we know where they are. So the big question for me is, once these companies come forward with their strategic projects to the CRM board, I know some people in the audience here are waiting eagerly for these proposals, what is going to happen? Because we don't really know that. We've seen it in a document, we see how it should work, but we don't really know what is going to happen. So strategic projects will be submitted, they will be scrutinized by the CRM board, they will be either given the label as a prioritized strategic project. In the case of a mining project, that means that the permit should be provided within a period of 27 months, compared to 15.6 years at this moment on average. So quite fast. Not fast enough for our 5 minutes metaphor, but relatively fast. But what is going to happen once these strategic projects, for example, Norrachar in Sweden, very, very controversial case. Mina de Barroso, Savannah, Portugal. I can see what is going to happen immediately. The opposition of a tiny vocal minority is going to be massive. And they're going to use any single possibility they can find in any possible conflicting EU legislation to start court cases against these strategic projects. So that's what I'm really worried about. Are we going to allow in Europe, again, that a very tiny vocal minority is going to hijack what most of the other people actually want to see happening? And do we have an answer in Europe? And I think that is our Achilles heel in Europe, that we, of course, we are happy and we are proud that we are a democratic place, that we are not like China, that we're not totalitarian, that we do not put other people that we don't like in prisons, and that we do not allow people to make comments about projects. But I think, personally, that the pendulum here has swung to the other side, where we now allow that even one person who knows enough about legal situations can block any project in Europe, even strategic projects. So how do we deal with strategic projects?
And that's not, it's a deep debate that we're not going to go too deep into today with our frame, but the social license to operate
if you want to advance your EU industrial plan, then the key question is going to be, will we be able to allow the strategic projects from actually being implemented? And that's your answer.
But I would like to say we keep democracy and we keep rule of law. That's the bottom line.
That's quite obvious. I did not say anything about that. I just said we don't have to be naive either. We should not allow single... I've been involved 10 years in the landfill mining agenda. I put it on the agenda, and we had the European consortium about it. And we had the most beautiful ESG-friendly project you can imagine, and we convinced the whole local community that this was something that they should do, but there were 2 or 3 people that kept opposing the project, and they were able to block it in the Belgian states by very intelligent use of all existing possibilities within the Flemish and Belgian legislation. And that's what I see coming, that this will be happening with the strategic projects.
From your side, a point we definitely have to address, that we need to make sure that we can avoid a situation where a minority or a very small minority block the needs and requirements of
If
the
they're
majority.
deemed strategic projects with an overriding public interest.
Yeah. A can of worms will open another time, but Stian, Julia, okay.
Yeah,
quickly.
and also picking up on, of course, now we're short on time, the 5 minutes or 5 years, but also really work on this public acceptance, kind of education in a way on what's going. You're doing that, and also be able to share the benefits of the activities with the local communities to create that support. I think what we're seeing, we're employing new industry at a large scale. Of course, that comes at some cost in a way. But we're also seeing that a lot of young people want to join this industry. They want to actually produce something, and it's a modern industry, and they really see what we are doing and the reductions of CO2 footprint and how important this is. So I think we should work more on getting that public acceptance. And
more is needed. Julia?
Yes, no, I think it's a very critical discussion. Maybe just to briefly answer to that question, in my view, I think where Europe and the West should really focus, as no regrets, is on the more valued processes of processing, but also recycling. I'm very tired of hearing about recycling as an environmental policy. It's an industry. It's an industry that requires industrial policy to be built. But when it comes to mining, I think that we will, in the coming years, have a more diversified approach, with most of that coming from abroad. So I think we need to put as much effort in our more aggressive international diplomacy to even take stake in strategic projects, as we do in building some of the mines here. Social license to operate is a really hard conversation. It's very, very, always I find it so difficult because I hear so views. I was in Chile, for example. I met some local communities, they also have their view on this. I'm not saying we have the same problems in Europe, but it's just so difficult. But at some point we need to understand that we are building an entirely new carbon-free economy. It doesn't come from the air. It needs to be built, right? So I'm actually genuinely upset about this BSF situation, right? It's really, really upsetting what's happening in Finland, because we can't build that without it. But the only way for me to go about it, having spoken with some local communities, is shared governance and decision-making of these projects. It's the only thing. That's what people want, and if they don't get it, it's just not going to happen.
Okay, clear. Let's transition on to our next question now, which was here, and then we'll come over this side. Can we get a microphone over here, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Ines Vanier, the Aegis Europe. I would like to refer to the business case that we need. So I was personally involved 20 years ago in the defense of the magnesium production in France, Péchinet at that time. And we were successful because in the end we had trade defense measures against China, but our proceedings are too slow and our measures are too weak, because what resulted is that in fact these measures were absorbed, circumvented, and at the end of the day, we all know what happened. The French plant had to shut down. That happened more than 20 years ago. Since then, we know that magnesium is on the list of critical raw materials for many, many years. And we all say, we have to be resilient in Europe and we shouldn't depend upon China. I have heard, at least for 4, 5, 6 years, about possibilities of resuming magnesium production in Europe. As far as I'm aware, that hasn't happened yet, for the same reasons, because we haven't addressed the roots of the problem. And so I would like to address another business case, solar panels. We are so green in Europe, we need solar panels, high tech. I also was very close to the lawyers who defended the solar panel case some years ago. In 4 years, China went from 0 market share to 80% market share. The result is that all this industry was completely bankrupt and had disappeared. Now we hear, because we are green and we have the Green Deal, we have to have, of course, our own solar panel manufacturing. But that is not happening either, because we haven't addressed, again, the reasons for that not happening. Today, in all warehouses in Europe, there are plenty of Chinese solar panels. And we have lost not the battle, we have lost that war. So I think that there is something wrong. And even if we have a business case, we have to really address the fact that we are competing with other players which don't have at all the same rules, and our trade defense rules are much weaker than in the US and much longer.
Okay, it's clear. What would you propose, though, as a solution to that?
A solution, I would say we should, in addition to what has been said, I would say please revisit our trade defense rules. We are not quick enough, and the level of the measures is not high enough. Another example, silicon.
Well, can I hold the example if you don't mind, and I'll put it to the panel because I'm just keeping an eye on
1
time.
second.
Yeah.
In the US, 125% on Chinese silicon, compared to 16.8 in Europe.
Okay,
And
your
that's
point's a
it.
clear one. Okay, great. Let's pick that up super quick. Not to ignore in this debate, of course, and something we wanted to go on to anyway. So, do we need stronger trade defence measures to complement Critical Raw Materials Act and other things to balance this equation better for us? Judith, I see you want to come in on that.
Yeah, partly because the event that you quoted, that you hosted a few weeks ago, was actually a joint event with Aegis Europe, with IndustriALL Europe. So just to recognise that that was a joint event there. But it's clear that in this paradigm shift that you're talking about to deal with the critical raw materials sectors, we need our trade policy rulebook to get with the programme as well. And at the moment, it simply isn't, in all kinds of respects. We're missing concrete. We've just written a letter with Eurofair about the situation in the stainless steel sector, where we see circumvention as a really big danger. We have massive overcapacities that we know are there, that are waiting to come into the European market. I mean, we don't have the toolkit in terms of trade policy that's necessary to create the protections that we need. So the single market, the internal market muscle, is sometimes held behind the back by our trade policy, which isn't working in the same way. And I think that this is really a systemic problem now in terms of the European industrial strategy. And level playing field is, our rhetoric, if you like, but sometimes we say it with an increasingly cynical kind of tone because of the cases that we say, and Ines has outlined some of them. The solar sector is clearly a really massive example, but what we're seeing in nickel and Indonesia is another, where we see also other, I've got to be careful how I put it, but the influence of the Chinese kind of economic interests playing through other countries in Southeast Asia, creating even more circumvention into European markets.
So clear from your side then that our single market muscle in Europe is tied behind our back sometimes by a trade policy that needs to be more robust. Tom, you got anything you want to add to that?
I think the main problem is that we are still in two different minds. We see this also in the EV industry. Compare the CEOs of the French EV companies versus the German EV companies. The German EV companies still think in terms of globalization. And they want to produce German EVs and sell them on the Chinese market. And they don't want these tariffs by von der Leyen on the Chinese EVs entering Europe. The French EVs are going for cheaper EVs, more affordable ones, smaller ones. And they do want the tariff. So you see, we still have this. On the one hand, we're still in this WTO neoliberalization, globalization type of world, and we want to play the game by the WTO rules. On the other hand, we realize that we're playing football against another team that is using American football rules against us, and we know we can't win that. So for me, that's quite essential that we all understand that we need to adopt new rules, and that we need to understand that we also need to play with similar rules as our opponents, because if we don't, we are really lost. And this is where we really need a common European identity to work in the same direction. And frankly speaking, we're not doing this at the moment because we're pulling in different directions. We have some companies who are purely made in Europe. Look at the Swedish and the Boliden, LKAB type of companies who are really active in the Nordic countries. Then we have other companies that are active globally who ask the question, yeah, where should I invest? Where can I make the best deal? For big multinational steel companies, for example, like ArcelorMittal, yes, you can question yourself, why would they invest in Europe at the moment?
Okay, Kerstin, do you want to come in on that briefly?
Yes, I want to come in on the single market muscle because there are two new instruments that we now have. One is the foreign subsidy regulation and the other is the forced labor regulation. And the foreign subsidy regulation, which kicks in for public tenders that are more than 250 million euro, and where bidders have to explain if they've had foreign subsidy. And if we don't believe it, we can start an in-depth investigation. And we've done that twice now. Okay. And in the first case, the bidder who was bidding, you know, like 3 times lower than anybody else, withdrew from the market. It was railways, but still. So it will kick in and it will happen, and it is happening. And we have the forced labor regulation is another piece. The effect of that regulation will be a product ban for the whole of the single market. Actually, Mr. Letta in his report says we have to move from the idea of a single market, so single rule set, to European market, which is Standort Europe, you know, business location Europe. And we have to work on that concept of business location Europe, where yes, we need the single rules, but we also need support for competitiveness, in particular in vulnerable situations that we see the transformation. Now, de-risking, financial protection, to give the space to invest and transform. And then we also need to look at the resilience. This is what we've learned from the war that Russia's waging against Ukraine, and what we've learned from the COVID experience. So we're going into that direction of a strong single market muscle.
Okay, no, we've got one more question pending over here, and then I want to wrap up the panel, and then I want to wrap up the event so we can finish in a timely manner, everybody. So let's make this a brief one, please.
Is this?
It's on,
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, it's on. Clemens Rosenmeier, my name, from the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber, from the industry division, so actually representing companies who mine and produce these materials, and then also the off-takers. And I've been to a number of conferences in the last few weeks, Clean Tech Conference, the Circular Economy Conference also this week, or was this week. And what I've heard so far, I like a lot when you speak about the business case and also thickening kind of the value chain or implementing a value chain approach. But so far it has been, in all these conferences also, they're a bit more inwards looking. Now the Austrian industry gains or makes 6 out of 10 euros in exports. So I like, if we say we create a new market with green premiums, where are we going to sell this? In Europe, that's 40% of our market for the Austrian industry, for example. And there's a lot of other countries who are very much export oriented. Now that's not the case for the US economy, for example. So maybe you can comment on this consideration of where do we export these products then afterwards?
Okay, yeah, we've talked about creating those lead markets in Europe. Can I give you about 20 to 30 seconds each for a quick comment, if you want to come in, on how can we do that also in an outward-looking way?
Well, the outward-looking way is that every country more or less has signed Paris goals, and they will need to decarbonize their industries, and they will need products to do this or technology to do this. So the market potentially is global for these products.
Maybe I would just say, I think we should be creating that green premium or ESG market with our like-minded partners. So indeed, if we join forces with the US, Canada, Australia, Japan, that's already a lot of the market, right? So the mineral security partnership, for example, can be the basis to build something there.
Okay, any other comments we want to bring in quickly on that,
Getting
Stian?
this traceability in the products and really develop these passports and stamps in a way of like green products.
Okay,
and maybe because nobody else mentioned it, we really have to use the review clause on CBAM to look at the exports dimension as well.
Okay, Tom, anything you'd add on that?
No, nothing particular, no.
Nothing particular, no. Okay, which leads me then to, I'm going to hold that one if you don't mind, just with an eye on time. I don't want to keep everybody 10, 15 minutes past 5 o'clock. So I want to wrap up now. I'm going to go, Tom, starting with you, and I'll move along the panel. So our theme was advancing EU industrial plan for European raw materials resilience. We've touched upon a lot of areas. It's a broad topic. I think we've covered some good ones. What are your final takeaway comments, your final conclusions or call to action for all of us here collectively here in the room? Tom?
Well, I reiterate the importance of the strategic projects. We have to get them defined, endorsed and implemented, and stay strong when we get attacked by vocal minorities.
Okay, clear from your side, Jude?
I think I'm going to do something that I don't think I've done very often in the past, but I'm going to quote an EPP politician. But I think there is actually now in the last few months, there has been a momentum built. The Antwerp Declaration, the Letter Report, the discussion. Industrial policy is right at the top of the political agenda, only knocked off by very grim things that are happening geopolitically in the world. And I think we have to avoid that momentum is killed by the results of the European Parliament elections. So I think it's absolutely critically important that there's a cross-party consensus built around the need for a rapid agenda to push forward an industrial policy, that this is cross-party consensus after the European elections, and that we do everything. Certainly we are from the trade union movement. I would hope that you from industry are also doing that we do everything to get out the vote for sensible politicians. I'm not being party political about who they are, but I think we need a European Parliament which works and not a European Parliament full of grandstanding populists.
Okay, very clear from your side. Stian?
It's about starting on the customer side and pull it through incentivizing the choice of net zero and circular products. But I think I would just use the last time here, just a topic we didn't touch that much upon. But what we are producing is very energy intensive. And this is a bit basic in a way, but if you don't have the energy available, we're not going to be able to advance these industries and energy at affordable prices. So I think this was also mentioned by Fatih Birol recently, that this is one of the main concerns in a way of the European industry, access to affordable energy. And here we're really lagging China and the US. And I think, of course, here we are a little bit in the same kind of challenging area as we have with mining also, and the public acceptance and build out of more solar, more wind and so on. So this also needs to be tackled, of course, in a way.
And tackled with urgency. Julia?
Yes, no, I think we do have a good plan in Europe, and now it's really about beefing up that plan with finance and doing it. I'm going to try and use an analogy. I'm not very good at analogies, but I really hope we accelerate implementation of all of this like an electric vehicle, not a petrol old clunker.
Okay, super clear. And Kerstin, finally?
For me, single market muscle to create a really good industrial business case in Europe for the rest of the world, and in particular for high quality jobs and skills to work around that. And I think Europe has all it takes.
Okay, thanks very much. Can we give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen? Can I seat you down now? Thanks. Thanks a lot. We've got about 5 minutes left, which is the 5 key minutes we need to bring things together and send you all off to the main room here of Auto World, where we have our networking and refreshments and snacks for you afterwards. So as you go out the door, ladies and gentlemen, you'd swing right and you'd find the place where the networking is happening. But before we do that, I want to bring up to the stage very quickly the Director General of Eurometaux, Guy Thiran, for some wrap-up comments just around what we've heard today. So stay with us for 5 more minutes, ladies and gentlemen, and then we'll unlock you for that next phase. So could we welcome him with a round of applause, please? Be pleased to know, because long wrap-ups at the end never work well, do they? What needs to be said can be said well and clearly, like we've heard before. So I've got 2 questions for you, Guy. The first one I think is a very obvious one in a way. We've seen the opening interview that we did with the president of Eurometaux. We've seen the presentation of the Eurometaux Manifesto and the key recipe within that. We've also had our debate amongst our MEPs on the stage, and we've also had our panel now. And a lot of points have emerged from that. What are the things that stand out for you today around this whole idea of the rallying call for raw materials resilience in Europe?
Yes, what I certainly would say is that I have heard a lot of convergence. I have heard in the mouth of many people the same words: implementation, competitiveness, urgency, which means that there is a growing feeling and even, I would say, consensus that the lines are moving. But the devil is always in the detail. We have had a time during 5 years where we had objectives set by the Green Deal. That says the what. And then we enter in a period where we need to define the how. And when we define the how, remember the debate we had with our colleagues of the European Parliament, it's at the moment when we start asking how would you do that, that you start seeing the differences. And I have a strong concern that those debates on the how could hijack at the end the implementation of a goal that we all have in common. We heard about also the need to have stability and predictability. I always wonder when I talk to my people and when I talk later on with politicians, how we can reconcile the notion of stability and predictability when our horizon in industry is 10, 20, even 30 years, with policymakers operating in policy cycles of 4 to 5 years. And I have the feeling that this creates that level of uncertainty that prevents to invest. Because investing in the direction that we have all discussed today is not just a question of money. Money is important, of course. But even when the money is there, you realize that a number of people do not invest because there is too much uncertainty. So I think that there is a real need for moving in aligning more and more the how and have the political courage to see the benefits of society, to see the benefits of everyone, be given the priority on the concerns of some minorities. Peter Tom mentioned that in the debate we have on industrial deal coming after the Green Deal. I want to reiterate very strongly, as someone who has co-signed the Antwerp Declaration, that they do not go against each other. There are two sides of the same coin. The Green Deal says the what, the industrial deals must implement the how. And if I could find a coin with 3 sides, and maybe it will be the green nickel coin, I would say it has to go together with the social agenda. Yeah. And I think everything has to go hand in hand in a coherent manner. And the coherent manner means having a common sense of what should be the priorities and alignment of priorities. When I speak to the CEOs in industry, I keep hearing I have priority 1, 2, and 3. And they align. And when I see how policy is made, I see priority A, B, and C. And sometimes they shoot themselves in the foot by not having consistent priorities. So I think there is a need for changing a number of models. Society model, we see the direction we need to go. Business model, we need to think about that. And I'll come back to that maybe later. And also policy model. I think all that needs to develop and change altogether in a coherent and complementary manner.
Okay, clear. My second and last question has almost a personal tone to it in a way. Some of you in the room know, some of you perhaps don't, but Guy, after many years as Director General of Eurometaux, is retiring at the end of this year. You've been in the industry for a long time, so you've got that optic of everything you've seen, and then you've got that thought about what's coming next. I just want to, excuse the pun, but I want to mine that for just a second. What at this stage for you, looking back on so much and looking forward to what we know has to come, what are the reflections that brings from your side?
Well, I'll bring maybe a combination of Eurometaux-oriented, industry-oriented reflections and maybe some personal reflections too. our role as Eurometaux, I have a number of colleagues of Eurometaux here. I have a number of people of industry we are working with and for. In defending the case, the challenge is to be heard, and to be heard by policymakers, to be heard by other stakeholders. We need to be credible. We need to be trusted. And that means we need to convey a message that reflects the trend of society and not appear to be away from that. And I think sustainability is a real driver, and we need to stay strong on our sustainability message and not really compromise them. And second, we need to bring solution. I think when we advocate for messages, the chances of being successful and being heard is when we bring win-win solutions. We need to bring solutions. Very often, I have seen cases where we were having extremely strong industry messages, but that were not aligned with the core, the scope of the debate, which was going to be totally different for finding a solution. So win-win in advocacy is critical, and that's where we need to work, continue to work together as industry. We are stronger when we speak together, but also we are more coherent than when we speak in a very isolated manner. You were asking me about trends. Yeah, I have a strong feeling that, and the debate today has reinforced that, we may have to think in industry as not only the business case, but also business models. How are we trading metals? How are we pricing metals? For the moment, LME is more or less the place where it's done. You spoke about your nickel count, Kerstin. How do we create that demand for that? And how are we making that green nickel coin or Boliden or Rubis green copper, how are we making them more attractive? How are we creating the demand for that? So I think there is a need to think about the business model on the one hand, but also how this business model integrates with policy models and integrates with society models. Another trend that I see is the appetite of society for transparency. I think the time when industry was able to say, yeah, but I don't want to disclose that because it's confidential for my business, I'm convinced that this time is over. We need to keep in mind that being transparent is a necessary condition for being credible and trusted. Now, the greening of society, that's for me inevitable and necessary, implies that we need to be able to show and demonstrate how we contribute to that, how we are as an industry scoring against those sorts of objectives. And that capacity, no, that need that we have to demonstrate that goes hand in hand with facts, figures, data. And I think that our industry needs to make some efforts individually at the level of companies, but also collectively at the level of industry to bring that transparency, to bring that evidence, and to bring those data. Maybe one other words for my colleagues in Eurometaux. The capacity that we have to defend the case of the metals industry is because of the quality of work that's being done within the team of Eurometaux, but also in the interaction between the team of Eurometaux and the members. So we need to be very supportive of that. We need to be very grateful for the work that's being done, and I want to thank them all here. And maybe last point, speaking as a father, as a grandfather, I'm of course concerned about what we're going to leave behind us. And I'm confident about our society's capacity to deliver the expectations. The first question you raised was about how confident we were about the critical raw materials. I was raising my hand for the second. That means more on the positive side. I have the feeling that the momentum that we see shows the understanding that we need to act, but I'm strongly convinced that the capacity to deliver will depend on our capacity to work together on those business model, society model, and policy models. And I think that everything around that goes with one element that is critical for me: to understand each other, to be able to talk to each other, we need to have some simple principle. We need to speak a simple language and not lose our time in the detail. The devil is in the detail. And very often the incoherence comes when we try to solve the details instead of solving the big picture. And I keep saying, well, to be understood really deep, talk like if you were talking to your grandmother, and I would say to my grandchildren. So that's really the message I would like to leave here. And thank you again for great contribution to the debate, your participation, and now I hope you will enjoy the after meeting, after conference fun, I would say.
Thanks very much, Guy. I declare this event officially closed, ladies and gentlemen.